The
Okay,
recording is
that's
starting
good.
now. All right, Darcy.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Um, I'm calling the June 8th meeting of the Transportation Advisory Board to order. My name is Darcy Kitching, and I serve as chair. Our technical host for tonight's meeting is Veronica Son. Veronica, would you like to share the technical rules for everyone?
Yes. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Thank you for joining the Transportation Board meeting to strike a balance between the meaningful, transparent engagement and online security. The following rules will be applied. This meeting has been called to conduct the business of the City of Boulder. Activities that disrupt, delay, or otherwise interfere with the meeting are prohibited. The time for speaking is limited to 3 minutes. No person shall speak except when recognized by the person presiding, and no person shall speak for longer than the time allotted. Each person shall register to speak at the meeting using the person's real name. Any person believed to be using a name other than the one they are commonly known by will not be permitted to speak. Please use the raise hand function to be recognized for public comment. If you are on the phone, you will need to press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. No video will be permitted except for city officials, employees, and invited speakers and presenters. All others will participate by voice only. The technical host of the meeting shall enforce these rules by muting anyone who violates any rules. The Q&A function is enabled. It will be used for individuals to communicate with the host. It should be used only for technical online platform related questions. If an attendee attempts to use Q&A for any other reason other than seeking assistance from the host, the city reserves the right to disable that individual's access to chat. Only the host and individuals designated by the host will be permitted to share their screen during the meeting. Thank you.
Veronica. Okay, our first order of business is to approve the May meeting minutes. Did all members present have a chance to review the minutes from the May meeting?
Yes.
Yes. Sound good? Okay, great. Would anyone, yes, Meredith?
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I have an amendment to the minutes.
Please.
I inserted the time that Trini was able to join the meeting because the approval vote for approval of April minutes was 4 in favor, 0 against. The approval time for adjournment was 5 in favor, 0 against. And so I inserted that Willerton joined the meeting at 6:05 p.m.
Thank you, Meredith. Appreciate that. So let's vote on the minutes as amended. Would anyone like to put forth a motion to approve the May minutes as amended?
Move to approve.
Okay, anyone second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. All in favor of approving the May meeting minutes as amended, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, we will approve the minutes as amended. Thank you, Meredith. 4-0. Great. Okay, so our next order of business is public comment. We welcome comments from any members of the public who would like to talk about anything having to do with transportation in the city. So, Veronica, do we have anyone who would like to speak this evening?
Let's see. We have one person raising their hand. Lynn, I'm going to ask if you can confirm if you are able to speak.
Wonder what you're doing to get more engagement. I feel self-conscious here being the only one to speak every time. Like, I hear a lot of complaints out in the community, but I don't hear it much at the boards. So I don't know what you can do, but there better be some more people on these calls, or like, am I just wasting my time too? That's what it feels like. Like I wrote to you, Blythe, I don't support spending one more cent on any studying of the future study of the airport. it's ridiculous that we blew this, I don't know, couple $100,000 already. I mean, as it stands with me, I had a retrofit put on my house without my input, and it's completely useless to me. And this was taxpayers' money that was just wasted because of logistics. And so I don't have a lot of faith in the city knowing how to do things the right way so that, my retrofit would actually work for me and I'd use it because I won't. And same goes for my airport, you know, like clearly, let's deal with it in 2040 and not blow any more money in this economic downfall we have. I know you paved 6th Street. That's very nice. You also paved 5th Street, which is curious to me because it's not used as much. But I really feel the road because I'm always riding my bike. I drive my car 4 times a year. And I feel all the ruts and I feel my glass ice bottle on my holder juggling around occasionally. I ride fast. I'm serious, and occasionally it comes out and breaks just by riding on your roads. And I get that it's great that we have Sundance coming here, but my view of Sundance is it's going to make it plenty worse here. There's going to be people from all over the world wanting to come here. And we've already got an inelastic market. There's enough demand to cover many, many times of what we need. And then we have the unaffordables issue. So please say something, do something to get the right way going for Boulder, because this is not a sustainable thing that I want to continue because it's not working.
Lynn, and I will just agree that I also wish that we had more people interacting with our meetings. So let's work to get more people speaking here and looking at our meeting materials and all of that. Veronica, is there anyone else who would like to speak this evening?
We do not have anyone else.
Okay, let's just make a note that we will do our best to.
And can I add something? It is the summer.
Sure.
We're in the middle of
It
the
is the
summer.
summer.
It is
Yes.
unlike, yeah, it is unusual that it's only Lynn, in my opinion, but
yeah, it's true. And we do have some important topics this evening. So I would like to see community engagement on these topics for sure, especially because they really are significant. And speaking of which, the first of these items that we're going to hear about this evening is the staff briefing on the 2026 Boulder Valley Employee Survey findings, actually collected in 2025. So let's see, Blythe, would you like to introduce this or shall it go straight to Chris?
I'm going to hand to Stephen, but before I do, I would just like to add, Darcy and members of the board, this is super, super important, as I mentioned at an event last week, Darcy, that you invited me to. Thank you for that. And also, I did promote the TAB meeting, and I will continue to do that because I agree. Just want to second, third, and fourth all those comments that the more people that can participate, the better. And the Boulder Valley Employee Survey, just to say really briefly, is super, super important for us because I think few cities have the ability to track our data that long. With that, I hope I didn't steal Stephen's thunder. I'm going to pass it to Stephen, who's going to introduce Chris.
No, not at all. Thanks a lot, Blythe. So Stephen Rieha, and I'm the Transportation Planning Manager. Here to introduce Chris Haglund, who's presenting on the results of the most recent Boulder Valley Employee Survey. It's one of 2 major surveys that we conduct on a 3-year cycle and is critical to understanding how we're tracking travel behavior for how Boulder is making progress towards mobility goals. So as Blythe alluded to, the results of these surveys dating back to the 90s provide longitudinal insights into how we're progressing, and they inform the projects and programs that we prioritize investments in to advance citywide mobility and safety. So with that, I'll hand it over to Chris to take you through his presentation.
Thank you, Stephen. I just shared my screen. Is that visible? All right, excellent. Yeah, so thank you very much. Pleased to present the key findings of the 2025 Boulder Valley Employee Survey. So this is a survey that began way back in 1991. Basically at the our first TMPs when we started doing transportation master plans back in '86, and then I think we had a little update in '89. It was decided that we needed to start collecting some data to really understand how Boulder employees travel. This is paired with the modal shift report, which is the resident travel diary. So we originally were doing these every other year. Now we do them every 3 years, but it provides that great longitudinal data that we can really see long-term trends and track some of our goals. It's always conducted by a third party. We work with this third-party consultant to develop the methodology and adjust the questions over time, but primarily the core questions remain the same over time, so we can have that longitudinal data. This particular survey is really focused on employees, and this includes not only Boulder residents who are employed, who may work in the city of Boulder or may work outside the city of Boulder, and then also our non-resident employees, those employees that come in to the city to work. As I mentioned, we really look at this data to help us track our city goals and objectives as well. This year we had about 1,100 respondents. This does include some city municipal employees like ourselves, because we always want to survey them, especially with the Western City campus coming online soon, to really understand employee travel behavior for the city government. This year we did do something new though. Typically we do one large sample, and that is a sample where we contact employers based on size, location, and the type of business, so that we get a representative sample of the full business community. And we've been doing that since 1991. This year, we added a new component. We added an open survey. It was kind of our first time doing that, but we provided a link and a QR code so anybody could take the survey, even if their employer was not selected as part of the process. Generally, we collect data on work trips and also trips that are made during the day. In terms of what mode do they use, the time and the distance, the purpose of the travel, and all that data around the work day. When do people arrive at the office or at the job site? When do they leave? We also collect demographic data on the individuals who are employed and some of their household characteristics as well, such as do they have access to a car? Do they have access to an electric bicycle, for example? The report is available online. There was a link in your packet as well. So kind of getting on to some of the key results of the survey. I would say overall, what we're seeing in this data is that some of the COVID impacts and those trends related to COVID-19 and the pandemic are starting to reverse. In our 2022 survey, we saw some significant declines in many areas and just changes related to travel, like telework really increased during COVID naturally. We did not do surveys during COVID, so we do have kind of that break between 2017 and 2022. One of the things we are seeing is that some of the trends we saw are reversing, such as the overall single occupant vehicle or SOV mode share for work trips. We want to keep that going down. We have a goal of getting that overall to 60%. So we did see an increase during COVID, but gladly we saw a decrease in this go round to 66% of respondents to the survey reporting that the single occupant vehicle was their primary mode. In terms of transit, we did see a decline of transit listed as the primary mode, going down to its lowest ever at 2%. But overall, transit was a part of 7% of all of the respondents to the survey. And I think that really brings up an important point, is that when we ask, how did you get to work? We ask, how did you get to work the day that you filled out the survey? We also ask, how do you typically get to work? And then we also, because we have seen an increase in the amount of multimodal trips, we also ask, what is your primary mode? What do you consider your primary mode? But we have seen an increase in that multimodal share up to 8% in this survey. So people are combining different modes. So we did see transit decline as the primary mode, but overall transit is still 7% of the overall mode share, which is great because that really declined during COVID. So we are seeing that reversal, even though we see the primary mode decreased. One of the key things, trends that we've been tracking over time is the difference in travel behavior between our Boulder residents who are employed and our non-resident employees. We see a significant difference. Boulder residents at the bottom of the graph, we have seen significant declines in that SOV mode share for work trips, down to now 49%. We had a little lift during COVID, but we're glad to see that going down right on the edge of statistical significance there. But as you see on that top line on the graph, we really haven't seen much of a change in our non-resident employees. They've kind of stuck around that 80%. The only real significant change was in 2008 when it dropped down to 74. But if you remember back then, economic recession and $5 gasoline back then, which probably would be like $7 in today's dollars. So, but as soon as the gas price went down, it went right back up. So certainly price elasticity of gasoline is a key factor in travel behavior, especially for our non-resident employees. Now, although we have just been able to keep that steady, in some ways you could see that as a positive thing, because we are facing so many external pressures for those non-resident employees. We track how far people live from work, and we have seen that non-resident employees, every time we do the survey, their one-way trip distance is increasing and increasing and increasing. Now it's averaging almost 19 miles one way. And, I like to think of it as that, a lot of our non-resident employees travel more in a vehicle for a one-way work trip distance than our Boulder residents travel all day for all trips and vehicles. And that's the significance of how far people are going, which is certainly related to affordability. But it is significant. It is growing. Another trend that we have seen is that not only are our non-resident employees traveling further distances to get to their jobs in Boulder, more and more they're living outside the RTD service area as well, really limiting transit as a viable mode, which is why we've really focused on van pooling over the last few years. We have doubled the subsidy that we provide to van poolers, and we have successfully more than doubled the amount of vans in our van pool program servicing our Boulder employees. I would like to say that CU has certainly led the way. We've been working with CU on their van pool program, and we just added another van pool for them last month. But they have over 20 vans now on the road just for CU. One of the other trends that we've seen is around telework. Of course, we saw telework increasing, and especially among Boulder residents. But when COVID hit, we saw almost a doubling of telework as the kind of the travel or the non-travel that our residents and non-resident employees took to get to work, or not to get to work, I guess. But we did see in this survey a decline down to 56% of those saying that they have teleworked at least once during the week of the survey. So that's very important to see that some of those changes are happening. That means that more employees are returning to the office, which is really good for our local economy and our sales tax as well. One of the trends that we do see when we look deeper in the data is that if you're a teleworker and you're teleworking 4 to 5 days a week, you pretty much stayed in that pattern. It was really the more infrequent teleworkers, the 1 or 2 day a week teleworkers, are the ones that are returning to the office in greater numbers. But telework, it's one of those double-edged swords. We have the economic issues related to people returning to their work, but at the same time, it's really great for reducing greenhouse gas emissions especially for our non-resident employees who telework. One of the other things that we've seen that I was so thrilled to see is that employee access to the EcoPass has rebounded from the COVID lows. Prior to COVID, we were seeing steady increases year after year of employees having access to the EcoPass, either through their employer or sometimes through their neighborhood, or for students who work also through the university. We saw a significant decline during COVID, but we were pleased to see a significant increase back to 39% of employees having access to this. Credit certainly goes to Boulder Chamber Transportation Connections. We had this as one of our priorities in their work tasks that we have to try and get businesses who left during COVID, left the EcoPass program, to get them to re-sign up, providing them some rebates to do that, and certainly successful. So it's great to see. And the reason why this is so important is because EcoPasses remain the best tool we have for changing travel behavior. We see again and again, not only do people with EcoPasses use the bus more for work trips, they also use it more for non-work trips. But people with EcoPasses either are non-resident employees or are Boulder residents. They also tend to take more biking and walking trips as well. So the EcoPass is really that gateway to modal shift. So we want to keep on encouraging our local employers to sign up for the EcoPass program. We also have our districts in Boulder Junction, in Caged, and Euged. And so I'm really hoping that the next time we do this survey in 3 more years, we're going to see tremendous increases, because now we have Boulder Chamber Transportation Connections not only working in Boulder Junction with employers and residents to get the EcoPasses, now they'll also be working in Cajun and Euged. So we're very excited about that. I think they're going to do a great job, and we're going to see that number increase. One of the other interesting things that we've seen, and this is something relatively recent we've been tracking only in the last probably 3 surveys, is really honing in on what type of vehicles are people using. If they drive to work or they carpool to work, what types of vehicles are they using? And we have, since we've been tracking this over the last 3 surveys, we have seen significant increases in the use of hybrid or electric vehicles, which is great. You can see in that one graph that, back in 2017, 93% of people who were using vehicles to get to work, they were gas powered. That has reduced down to 74% as electric, plug-in electric, and hybrid have been increasing within the city of Boulder. So this has a tremendous impact on our emissions. When we look at meeting our emissions goals as a city for all emissions, it's reducing our emissions by 70% by 2030. In terms of transportation or mobile related emissions, our goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030. Basically, we have 3 ways of meeting that goal. We have mode shift, getting people out of cars. We have the CAFE standard, so people who are using a vehicle, more fuel efficient vehicles. And then we have electrification. And when we did our initial studies for how we're going to get to these goals, electrification was absolutely key And really, we thought would be the majority of those reductions would come from that. So it's great to see in this survey that we are seeing that exact thing where Boulder residents and Boulder people who work in Boulder have been early adopters into hybrid technology and now electric vehicles. And so we're seeing that, which is a great trend. Some of the other key findings that we've been looking at, and kind of the first one related to why van pooling is something that we're stressing now, and we've doubled the subsidies for van poolers, is that the further away someone lives from the work, the more likely they are to use a multiple occupant vehicle, and it makes van pooling very attractive, especially when people are living outside of the RTD service district. Another great finding that we've seen is that access to B-Cycle memberships through employers or individually has doubled since our last survey. So more and more people are getting those B-Cycle memberships as well. And it's great when employers can offer that as a benefit, much like the city does. As I've said, the EcoPass, again, remains one of the most important tools. People use it more. They use transit more if they have the EcoPass, both for work trips and non-work trips that are made during the day, and they also walk and bike more. So just to kind of summarize some of the most important things, what we saw in the 2022 survey, significant changes, some reversals in some of the trajectories we were seeing because of COVID, and we're seeing those reverse now, which is great to see. We've got amazing continued progress with Boulder residents who work, seeing that SOV mode share continue on that downward trend. And then we're holding steady with those non-resident employees, despite all those outside pressures that I mentioned, housing affordability, the jobs pop imbalance, and the location of their residences. I've been with the city since 2007 and have been working on this survey basically since then. And when I first started, 40% of our workforce lived outside the city, now over 60%. So that is one of those trends that we're seeing as well. I did also want to show one of the things that is shared in the modal shift report. So this is the resident travel diary, but just to really show what we have been able to accomplish in the city through investments in our infrastructure and investments in our program, investments in transportation demand management, is that Boulder residents travel so differently from the national averages. SOV mode share across the country is in the high 80s over time and into the 90s still. We're seeing in the 50% in Boulder. We started, not as high as some of the other as the national average, but we have been able to make significant changes to how people travel because of those investments that we've had and that we've seen. Our residents drive less, they take transit more, they bike more, they walk more. We do have a third of our population students. If everybody traveled like a student, we would make every one of our goals because students rarely drive. So now that we've finished and published the Boulder Valley Employee Survey, our next step for the metrics program is our dashboard development. So although we have this great longitudinal data, we haven't consistently had a great way of displaying that data on a dashboard. And so as part of our contract with our third-party consultant who does the survey, we've added a component that they're going to help develop these dashboards with us. The city has lots of different dashboards. I just put an example of the affordable housing dashboard that we have on this slide. But we thought this would be really great to track those slated city and transportation mobility goals and objectives, to really illustrate and kind of highlight some of those emerging trends and just be able to provide that data to the public. What we're looking at and what are the capabilities of Polko, which is the consultant that we use, is really creating interactive and static graphs and charts. So some can be static, but some would be interactive where the person can make some changes to it and kind of do queries on different questions or themes. We'll have full use of all the longitudinal data going back to 1991 for this survey. We'll make sure everything is digitally accessible and then have hyperlinks throughout. So we've already been working with Polko, and they have some dashboards that they've already kind of piloted, and we're going to be meeting with them to go over these. But it's really interesting how they can do that. You can look at sections that will have tracking of key goals and the monitoring of objectives. You'll be able to look at specific questions that are in the survey. You'll also be able to look at grouped themes. And then, as I mentioned, there'll be an interactive demographic so that when you look at a question, you'll also be able to look at the different demographics and sort by things like Boulder residents versus non-resident employees, males versus female, those types of things. One of the other cool things, this isn't quite ready just yet, but we'll be setting the stage, is having an AI-powered assistant. Her name is Polly for Polko, and we'll be able to have essentially a query section where people can type in a question like, what % of Boulder employees bike to work? And Polly will be able to look at the full longitudinal data set and summarize an answer to that. So it will be really interesting. Right now, they are in the process of creating the database of all those data sets all the way from 1991, and then they are training the AI agent. So I'm not exactly sure what that entails, but it is a process of Polly learning that data so that it can provide answers to written queries. But this is just a larger shot of what they've mocked up so far. So you can see the key metric section, and then you can look group by theme and look at questions related to that. There's different ways in which data can be presented, many different charts and graphs that you'll be able to look at and kind of look at these question themes as well. Just more examples, and this is actual data. So at this point, they have been able to plug in all the data from 2014 to this year's survey, but once we get full build out, it will be the whole data set. You can see some of the demographic type data we can provide as well. So this will all be available. I think some of the things that we need to figure out with Polko is the hosting of it, where does it live, how do we integrate it with wider city dashboards and things like that. But we'll be starting that process soon with them. As I mentioned, we'll also be able to look at specific questions and then actually within those be able to select cross tabs so that you can dive deeper and deeper into the data. So you can look at a question and then do some additional cross tabulation so you can find out how things change with different demographics. So we're very excited about this next phase in working with Polko and getting this city dashboard up. The other big next step is that we'll be doing the resident travel diary this fall. So this is just Boulder residents, people who live in Boulder, some of whom may work. We began this actually in 1990. We call it the modal shift report because we were really, focused on shifting travel behavior. It will basically start in September of this year. What we do is we send out surveys that can be answered in a variety of different ways, from paper all the way to online or on your phone. And this is sent to 15,000 households within Boulder. And then we usually hope to get about 10% of those folks to reply, and then we weight all that data. We can also then compare that to national household surveys and things like that. And so this will be done this year in 2026, and then it will be published kind of this time next year in 2027. Those reports are also available online. If you go to the City of Boulder transportation data and maps page, scroll down toward the bottom, and you'll find both the Boulder Valley employees and the modal shift report. So that's what I have for you. I appreciate your time and listening, and happy to answer any questions that you have. And I will stop sharing.
Great, thanks, Chris.
Sure thing.
What questions do TAB members have for Chris? Let's see. Let's go. I don't know who raised their hand first, but how about Mike?
Yeah, I have a few clarification questions. First, I would say this is really great and pretty rare among municipalities to have this level of data over so many years. My first question, a little confused. I think on your third slide, you said you had about 1,100 responses, and the report has a number of 781, and then on a couple of your dashboard slides, it's at 765. So are there different samples there, or?
I think it's we separate out the city employees, and that is a separate report for the city government employees. So like people who work for the City of Boulder government. And so that is the difference between the number of respondents to the survey, and then the 1,100 is adding in those residents. The other issue is that sometimes people don't complete the whole survey, and so sometimes different questions and different themes have different number of total respondents to that, and there are some skip patterns within the survey itself. So if you answer a certain way, you may not answer all the questions, and so that's why that number can change sometimes in the report.
All right. I had one more question or set of questions that are related. It seemed like this go around you introduced a new allowing people to self-select as participants, which I think is can skew the results a bit in some ways. I'm not sure if this year was the first time municipal employees were included. Is that right?
No, we always survey municipal employees, and we have a separate report for them just for municipal employees. So we've always done that. Sometimes we just, well, this year it was a little different because we had very specific questions around a Western City campus for the city employees. So they answered probably most of the same questions, but they had some additional questions around that new civic center. So, but we always include city employees. But it was the first time we did the open survey.
And then I think maybe part of that is that it said the share that were Boulder residents rose by 8 points to 42%, which, as we saw, the non-residents use single occupant vehicles more. And so maybe that's accounting for the 4% drop from 70% to 66%, which I think is not even in the report's significance threshold of 5%. So yeah. I just wonder, is there a way you can show side by side the self-selecting versus the others?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can certainly look at that and dive deeper into it. It was the first time we did it. It was more kind of an experiment to see what type of response we would get. But I would say, all the data that we do get, there is a weighting process that goes through to make sure that our sample is representative of both the employed Boulder residents and our non-resident employees. So there is kind of a step in between the raw data and the final data to weight that data based on the types of responses that we get. So that is involved. But yeah, I could certainly ask Polko to run some numbers of separating the self-select survey versus the employer selected survey and to see a difference. But from what I know from our conversations, they did not see any significant impact that would have shifted the numbers based on, I think it was a couple hundred people that did the self-select.
All right, yeah.
But I can have them do that and break that down and share that with you.
Yeah, Darcy, you had something?
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, in a way, everyone who participates in this survey is self-selected because the invitation goes out to employers. They then send it on to their employees, and it's the people who, a small percentage of people from those invited employers participate. So it's really reflective only of those who have chosen to participate overall. So there's a little bit of, it's a little tricky there. It's not like a sample was selected and everyone took that, took the survey. It really is all self-selection.
I'd be interested in seeing whether they could be corrected for the increase in the percentage of residents versus non-residents.
That's what I was thinking too, because we know that those percentages are higher. Like the percent of people who live in Boulder and work in Boulder is lower, and the percentage of people who live outside of Boulder and work in Boulder is higher. So that would might make a difference. But you might see the same patterns among those two populations.
Yeah, it's about a 60-40 split right now when we look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, which is difficult because there's many people who have more than one job. So it gets very complicated very quickly as you try to look at, we have data on the number of jobs that are held by, for example, non-resident employees, but some of those jobs, two jobs may be held by the same person. And so getting to the number of employees is, sometimes a guesstimate, let's say.
Yeah, Mike, I hope I didn't cut off any of your questions.
No,
okay, you're good. Okay, great. Thank you, Michael. Go ahead.
I am not surprised, but concerned by the fact that more and more people are commuting from outside the RTD service area. I was wondering if this strategy of using van pools could be facilitated or is already facilitated by allowing those vans to use the bus-only lanes that come in, the ones that have been recently installed, to see if that might promote that strategy. It's not going to probably help them in the hinterlands, but as they come in closer to the city, perhaps those bus-only lanes would make that mode more attractive to them.
Yeah, I mean that's a great suggestion. I'll certainly float that idea around. I haven't thought of using kind of like the new ones on Arapahoe and stuff like that. That would help hasten some of their trips because they're already taking much longer trips anyway. So like anything we can do to help would be great. So thank you. That's a great suggestion.
My other question, or maybe a thought really, was about this dashboard, which I'm all for, right? I think Darcy and I were like, yes, dashboards, a little while ago. And I would just note that, right, Chris, you added a lot of interpretive explanation. And I hope that interpretive explanation would live in that dashboard as well, so that people aren't obligated to kind of discern those patterns and relevant factors when they're looking at that data, because there's often, there's a risk when somebody looks at raw data without understanding the underlying factors, they may reach the wrong conclusion and then start wielding it as a cudgel for various reasons. I'd love for that not to happen.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Anyway, I think it's great. It is awesome to have such fantastic longitudinal data. I was thrown originally when I saw the title of Boulder Valley Employee Survey. I thought it was all going to be municipal employees. I don't know if that's something that to the extent if I were an employee and I got something like that, I might be thinking, well, I'm not a municipal employee. This was misdirected.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's something that can be done to, and maybe it's already being done in the way it's delivered to these employees so that they understand, hey, no, we really are talking to you.
Oh yeah, I think it's very clear, and we've been doing it for a long time, and this is, open to them, anybody, and that's why we use the term Boulder Valley to try and explain that it's the wider area uh, for that. But we do have the separate municipal employee report, which we have always used more internally, and really haven't like published that so much. We've more used it for our own TDM programs within the city.
Yeah, I was thinking of something like employee transportation survey for Boulder Valley, right? Something
Yeah.
that doesn't string all those words right together that make it look like one is modifying the next. But
Yes.
I don't know, you've got a professional pollster company working with you, so they
Yeah.
probably don't need my advice.
No, always good.
Well, and what you're saying, Michael, I think speaks to what we've talked about before about the communicating what these terms actually mean and how, same thing with the comprehensive plan. People who are new to the Boulder area don't know what the Boulder Valley is. And I think, it is pictured in the report for this report, but, it is a little confusing, I think, for a lot of people to understand what's the difference between the city of Boulder and Boulder Valley and Boulder County.
Yeah.
And all of those entities. And so however we can continue to communicate the reason for the Boulder Valley shape, which is different from those other two entities.
Yeah, it's bigger than the
it can
city
really-
limits. Yeah.
But not as big as the county, and it can be really confusing. Yeah. So maybe we need new ways to communicate that. Yeah, Trini, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I wanted to just echo kind of like what Mike and Michael both said, and I just have an additional thing. Well, I'm supporting what they said, and I think it's great feedback. But I was wondering, so beyond whatever you guys use with this data internally, is there access for other entities that might find this data useful? Like, is there any way that we can make this available so people can benefit from this study?
Yeah, so we've published it on our website, and we're going to do a press release. We always do a press release that provides that, and in the past, we've worked with the chamber to get that information out as well, because we really want, it really helps us to have more employers and representatives from employers aware that the city is doing this, so that if down the road their company gets selected to participate in the survey, that they know what that is and they're willing to send the survey links to their employees. So that is always beneficial for us. But yes, we do do the press release. Oftentimes the Daily Camera picks it up and does an article. Boulder Reporting Lab frequently reports on these surveys as well. But I really am hoping that the dashboard is kind of that next level of engagement that we can do with the community. And I do like, we try to keep the report fairly factual and straightforward, but I do understand, as Michael said, that nuance of the interpretation is also very important, which I tried to give a little bit more in the presentation than we do in the report itself.
Yeah, great. Well, and I just have a question about this. So are we paying extra for Poly?
No, this is all part of our a contract. Basically, as part of, since we basically have a 5-year contract with Polco, so that they'll do a survey, then we have an off year, a survey, and a survey. And as part of that, we get the dashboard. So it's kind of part of doing the 5-year commitment, is that we have access to their analytics, I guess you could say. But the Poly is one of their newest things, and I think they're very eager to test it with us. And I'm someone personally who's always a little leery about AI, but I think in this case, this may be a good use of it, that someone can type just kind of a normal question and it will be able to provide a summary answer. So we'll see.
Yeah, I know my skepticism is showing because I'm thinking,
Yeah.
the dashboard is great and giving people access to the data and certainly giving people access to the raw data to do their own analyses and all of that, I think is also important. And I guess the utility of an AI assistant for this purpose is not super clear to me, although, I mean, it may help the public navigate the data more, but I'm also concerned that Boulderites might see that as something that we shouldn't be paying for. So, but
Yeah.
I get it.
It's
I
part
know
of the
it's
package.
part of the package.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of the package. Yeah, I get it. Well, and having been, kind of involved in, getting the word out about this survey, I would like also just to see, it's a small sample of our population, and would really like to see kind of new efforts to increase participation in this survey. And I understand the importance of continuity of methodology over time and all of that, but if there's a way to, because I know that a lot of the entities that received the mailed invitation did not actually see it. And so how can we really increase the efficacy of the outreach methods that Polco and any other contracted entity are using? I think it's really important as people's, attention and their strategies for navigating this information changes. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Yep.
Go ahead, Trini.
Darcy, I'm wondering if there's I know this sounds kind of bizarre, but maybe there's a required chunk of the population that has to do this, and then I don't know. I understand the continuity and everything, but it just seems like, the fact that everybody gets to self choose whether they're going to participate or not kind of removes an element of, it seems like there might be a way to make it more scientific.
Yeah, the people who have the most travel issues might be the ones who respond, right? I mean, that's predictable in a lot of ways. So but I'm not sure how we could compel the employees of certain, employers to participate and just say, hey, you must do this as part of you. We don't have the power to do that, right? And we don't want to be doing that.
Yeah, it's difficult. And that's why we weight the data. We look at our demographic profile and we look at the responses we get and who are those people who responded. And then we weight the data towards our demographic. So we've always done that. And I would say, over time, we have experienced survey fatigue. Prior to COVID, we invested in creating a smartphone app that would be used to basically respond to the survey and track behavior. We thought it would be, kind of the next new thing. But I think we ran into the whole perception of I'm not going to install an app on my phone that the government tracks me travel.
Yeah.
And so, it's getting harder and harder to do. But yeah, I think each time we do this, we try to think of additional ways. Certainly, we try to engage the Boulder Chamber more. We've done that. And I think that's probably, where the bang for the buck is really getting, how do we find the right people to send the information to? How do we get a follow-up to them to do it? But we have seen fatigue over the years. I think anybody doing survey have seen that same type of fatigue. But that's why we have to weight the data. And we typically have a lot more respondents for the resident survey. We usually get way more than we need for to get usually we have like a 2% sampling error with the resident survey. So we get a lot more people are enthusiastic about that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, and Chris, I guess just the last little thing is does the data include the type of business or the particular the right word is escaping me, but like the sector.
Yeah, so the
that-
business, so yeah,
yeah.
we have retail versus industrial versus warehousing versus
Yeah.
office versus
That's
medical.
interesting too. Yeah, because I
Yeah.
know that doing some outreach, like different types of businesses were more interested than others. And so,
Yeah, it's much easier to get an office environment to respond to a survey than a restaurant or a warehouse.
which is
and-
important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
we for like our downtown restaurants, we offer paper surveys, we offer to deliver them, and things like that. So it's really a multi-pronged effort to get it. But yeah, overall, survey fatigue is certainly an issue.
Great. Well, thank you, Chris. Really appreciate the presentation, and it was wonderful to see these findings, and I think that they'll help to inform a lot of our collective work going forward. So thank you. We look forward to the full report.
Yep, and the dashboard will be working on that. And certainly I would love to get tab feedback as we have prototypes for the dashboard.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks. Thank you, Tab, for all your input. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you, Chris. Our next order of business is a staff presentation on the shared micromobility program, an update on that program. And Blythe, would you like to introduce Allison Moore Farrell and her presentation?
Thank you, Darcy. And likewise, just say something really briefly that I think our micromobility program and all of these things all help each other. I think the fact that our micromobility program is so well used is a reflection of a lot of the great work that we've been doing over many, many decades, which is reflected by that longitudinal data that Chris just provided. And I hope I didn't also just steal Stephen's thunder, but Stephen also will introduce Allison, so I'll kick it over to him.
Yeah, no, not at all. So hello again, Stephen Rijo, Transportation Planning Manager. Just wanted to introduce Allison Moore Farrell, who's providing an update on the shared micromobility program that the city partners with B-Cycle and Lime to administer. In her presentation, you'll hear about how the program is advancing citywide goals. It's a key piece of managing events and has become a model for programs across the country and industry. It's also a big year for the program since we're finalizing updated contracts with Lime and B-Cycle, aiming to address some of the challenges and expand upon what's working well. So with that, I'll hand it over to Allison to take you through her presentation.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. All right, I am sharing my screen. Can folks see my screen? All right, terrific. Let me minimize this. All right, great. Good morning or good evening, everyone. I'm Allison Moore Farrell, Senior Transportation Planner with the City of Boulder. Today, I'll be sharing with you about the city's shared micromobility program. A key action in our Transportation Master Plan is to expand access to shared electric micromobility. Micromobility refers to ways of getting around for smaller scale travel, like scooters, skateboards, and bikes. We work with B-Cycle to provide shared e-bikes and Lime to provide shared e-scooters. Shared micromobility offers yet another multimodal transportation choice to advance our goals around reduced vehicle miles traveled, greenhouse gas emissions, and it often serves as a first and final mile solution for transit. Let's start with a bit of history. Back in 2011, the city worked with B-Cycle to bring shared bikes to Boulder. In the early years, it was subsidized by the city to get the program established. As the performance of the system proved strong, we transitioned to a privatized model in 2021, where B-Cycle is allowed to operate in the city under a use agreement and pays per trip fees to the city that we in turn invest back into the public infrastructure, things like wayfinding, signage, and campaigns. As of 2026, B-Cycle has approximately 400 e-bikes in operation in Boulder and over 60 docking stations. This shared e-bike network has wide coverage in central Boulder, as you can see here. 49% of residents outside of Gun Barrel live within a quarter mile of a station. I'll discuss plans later for expanded coverage. Today, B-Cycle continues to be a valued partner in our community. I'm going to share a lot of interesting data over the next few slides, and while we'll walk through this fairly quickly, we can circle back and dig into any of it after the presentation. While ridership grew slowly but consistently in the early years, ridership significantly increased in 2021 and in every year since, as you can see here. This is primarily due to two factors: B-cycle electrification efforts. In 2021, B-cycle finished their transition to a fully electric pedal fleet. Every CU student receives a B-cycle membership through their student fees. And though the student membership accounts for a significant increase, there is still an increase year to year in ridership outside of the student memberships, which I think is important to note. In a city of just over 100,000 residents, we had over 859,000 shared e-bikes trips last year and over 26,000 unique riders. And I have to share that this is pretty incredible for a city the size of Boulder. And I wouldn't be surprised if we reach 1 million B-cycle trips in 2026. We are on track year to year to do that, so we'll keep you updated at the end of the year, but that would be very exciting. And here I'll be sharing a little bit about utilization and some additional data that points to the continued success of shared e-bikes in our community. Throughout 2025, we had 300 to 350 e-bikes active in the system. There's a range because we continue to add stations and bikes throughout the year. On an annual basis, B-cycle devices experience about 8.1 trips per device per day. And this is a typical way for shared micromobility to measure health of a system. And I just also want to share that this is very high, which is great. On many days or months, it's the highest in the nation for trips per vehicle per day. A healthy system is at least 2.5 trips per day. So what this tells us is that each bike provides a large amount of utility for Boulder's residents, employees, and visitors, and the system is ready for expansion. The average trip duration is 11.8 minutes, and the average trip distance is 1.7 miles. Now, we typically see longer trips on seated vehicles, like shared e-bikes, versus standing vehicles, which we'll see in the data later in the presentation. Like I noted, B-cycle has very high ridership for a docked e-bike system. It has higher total ridership than Pittsburgh, Portland, LA, or Austin. It actually had the highest trips per vehicle per day for the month of September 2025 than any other city in North America that is part of NACTO. This is very common, especially during fall, for our shared micromobility trips to have some of the highest TVD nationwide and even worldwide on some event days. I will note the data that we shared in the memo for September 2025 from the NACTO report is actually incorrect. NACTO miscalculated the data that was provided, and I didn't notice that until further review. So Boulder B-cycle actually had the highest TVD in North America for that time frame, significantly higher than most systems. So again, happy to share further information there. The other half of our shared micromobility system is e-scooters. Lime shared e-scooters first operated under a pilot program starting in 2021, in which they were allowed to operate east of 28th Street. After a successful one-year pilot, the city expanded the operational area for Lime citywide in fall 2023. Lime shared e-scooters are also allowed to operate in Boulder under a similar agreement with the city with similar trip fees. The system for e-scooters is a dockless model with geofencing technology regulating use and parking in high activity areas, which we'll touch on a bit later. As I mentioned earlier, the city conducted a pilot program. After conducting an evaluation and report, boards and commissions as well as city council supported citywide expansion of the shared e-scooter program. The geographic area of each e-scooter access increased threefold, and thus the number of e-scooters reflected that expansion, expanding from a cap of 300 to a cap of 900. City expansion in fall 2023 unlocked many destinations that were not reachable in the pilot that had limited operations east of 28th Street. During the pilot phase, ridership grew modestly, as you see here in 2021 and 2022. Then after citywide expansion, we saw exponential increase. 2023 ended with the first year of citywide expansion, ended with 338,000 rides. And I'll share that expansion didn't happen until August, so the latter part of the year. Whereas 2025 ended with 777,400 rides. So again, getting close to that million ride mark for 2026. Again, sharing about Lime utilization here. I'll share some additional data that points to the continued success of shared e-scooters in our community. Throughout 2025, we had 900 to 1,020 e-scooters active in the system. There's a range here because we occasionally allow an increase in vehicles during large events like CU football games. The typical cap is 900 scooters. On an annual basis, Lime delivers about 2.6 trips per vehicle per day, which again is high on a nationwide average. This demonstrates a healthy system with high device utilization. On CU football game days, we see a TVD of 7 to 8, which is oftentimes highest in the nation for those days. The average trip duration is 9.4 minutes, and the average trip distance is 1.1 miles. We typically see slightly shorter trips on standing vehicles like scooters versus seated vehicles. And we've just learned that they meet different needs. Lime has high ridership for a dockless e-scooter system. It has higher total ridership than large cities like Phoenix, Dallas, and Columbus, which again is very impressive considering we're only about 100,000 people. And it has above average trips per vehicle per day during the fall. As noted here, it's 4.3, which is above the NACTO average. This is, again, very common during fall when we have CU football games and other events. During the citywide expansion in fall 2023, we began with some of the technical tools to manage operations and parking. These included no-go zones. So I have taken some screenshots here on the right side so you can kind of understand where we work with Lime to implement some of these geo-fenced zones. So as you can see, much of the CU campus is in that red, and that's a no-go zone. So, the quads and different areas like this, you'll see Pearl Street Mall on the bricks. That's a no-go zone because you're not allowed to, ride bikes or anything there. So some of these places are really kind of natural no-go zones, but we continue to work with Lime if we need to adjust any of those. We also have slow zones. So those are the yellow areas you see in the screenshots there. And so these are, think 13th Street, 14th Street downtown going along the bricks. You have a lot of pedestrians walking there. So there's potential conflict between modes, and so just lowering that when there are a lot of pedestrians around. Same in the University Hill Commercial District. There's a lot of pedestrian activity there, so we do lower those speeds to either 12 miles per hour or 10 miles per hour. We also have no parking zones, so there's areas where you cannot park. There's many areas on the CU campus we have this. Something that's been really effective with helping manage dockless programs for us has been mandatory parking zones and mandatory parking corrals. So mandatory parking zones, if you are in that area, so in these screenshots, that's that blue zone right there. And it's very obvious when you pull up the app, I'm in a mandatory parking zone. If you try and park, in the parking lane anywhere that does not have a P, you're not allowed to do that. You have to park in one of the corrals. So you'll see right here, we have some above street corrals in downtown Boulder, and then we have some below curb corrals here in Uni Hill. So we have over 60 corrals in the city, and we continue to expand. Again, this really helps direct folks as to where they should be parking in the city. And honestly, we found this to be a win-win-win. And I say 3 wins because it's a win for the rider. It really directs them where to park. There's not confusion. They understand in the app exactly what they're supposed to do. It's a win for Lime. They're able to more easily distribute, and I'll show that in the next slide. And then it's a win for the city. We're having more organized parking, but still providing a lot of access for folks. And we also work extensively with neighborhood groups in University Hill and elsewhere to manage relationships with riders and non-riders. The primary aim here was to manage parking in the corral so that riders were not parking on lawns or sidewalks or public right-of-way. And given that these corrals are below curb near the intersections, they also act as a safety feature, daylighting intersections without removing any vehicle parking. Iterations like this are beneficial and also take a great deal of staff effort, including identifying appropriate locations that don't interfere with regular city functions like maintenance and snow removal and emergency operations in a physically constrained neighborhood like University Hill. Another iteration that has occurred with MPZ and corrals is the introduction of warnings and fines as a disincentive. If a rider does not park in a corral when they're in a mandatory parking zone, they first receive a warning. The second time they do receive a $10 fine. And because of this system that we've worked on with Lime, we see really good compliance within these mandatory parking zones. And we continue to aim to make data-driven decisions that are informed by community input. City staff and Lime staff are closely monitoring these iterations. So these images visually show the impact mandatory parking zones and corrals have had in the University Hill neighborhood. The image on the left shows parking prior to any mandatory parking zones or corrals. So this was when we first opened the program citywide, September, October 2023. There's parking all over. And And we were hearing complaints from neighbors. And so we worked with Lime to determine a solution. And once the corrals were implemented and geofencing was enforced, we see significantly more organized parking in this neighborhood. And again, this leads to better understanding of appropriate parking for riders. There's education in the app and more clarity for community members. They can very visually see, okay, this is where, Lime scooters should be parking, and it's more straightforward for Lime to redistribute. So we're seeing that image on the right here from the same time frame, but in 2025. And each of those locations are where corral is located, and that's how many people, how many devices have been parked there. So again, having all of this back end information through these devices is really helpful for us as we make iterations to the program and can understand where devices are being parked, where they're going, and how we can make some of those changes. I know I've shared some impressive numbers and efforts completed by staff and our operating staff. However, I also want to highlight that this is still a relatively new program in the grand scheme of transportation modes, and that it is in need and will continue to be in need of monitoring and iterations, and that is a key part of our program. I want to share community feedback, both positive and negative, as well as lessons we've learned thus far. Most community members we've connected with agree with shared micromobility as a policy and ways to meet city goals. Parking behavior, specifically parking on sidewalks, can be a challenge. This is especially concerning for those in our disability community. We regularly work with folks from CPWD and National Federation of the Blind to address issues and brainstorm solutions. Lime is also working on technology to prevent this. We are also working on other types of fines and warnings that could serve as a stick, as well as incentives for good behavior. Changing this rider behavior is one of the primary challenges we see. Riding behavior and following rules of the road in some neighborhoods is also a challenge, and affordability can be a challenge. While one ride is typically not cost prohibitive, as a daily rider, this can become a challenge. Some of the lessons we've learned that communication is key, both focused communication for micromobility users and riders, but also communication for all community members, riders and non-riders, so folks are seeing the same information and rules. Again, pointing to the corrals, visually able to see those and understand what should be happening. Proactive and reactive parking enforcement is key. We've worked with the city parking enforcement team and urban rangers to identify and report misparked scooters. We've also implemented mandatory parking zones, like I mentioned, and data-driven decisions allow us to understand more clearly what issues folks share with us. This backend dashboard that I've mentioned, Ride Report, allows us to be proactive and reactive with program iterations. And we've also learned we need to allow and accommodate the need for new infrastructure for this new mode. Here again, we see the significant growth that I mentioned. This is for the year 2025. The usage rates are considerably lower during the colder winter months, as we see here, and higher usage is commensurate with nicer weather and CU Boulder school schedule. Usage is typically highest in September and October, as you see here. The highest ridership month so far, total between Lime and B-Cycle, was October 2025 with over 132,000 rides. We see the highest ridership on CU football game days. You'll see the spikes noted here, which each account for approximately 10 to 12,000 trips in a day. I've also noted the Boulder, so it is interesting when we see these spikes and we can really dig into the data and identify those with game days and make adjustments there. Of note, you'll see between the two operators, we experienced over 1.6 million rides in 2025. Local and national studies show that approximately 40% of shared micromobility trips replace vehicle trips. Given this information, it can be inferred that shared micromobility trips in 2025 replaced approximately 653,000 driving trips from Boulder streets. CU, Lime, B-Cycle, and the city work together to strategize and implement appropriate game day management techniques. Lime identifies specific routes for riders that are geofenced, has additional staff to accommodate the additional demand, and events are highly managed and showcase all these tools working together in tandem. And it's important to keep in mind because on days when our community is experiencing an influx of visitors, these mobility devices can help folks get around town and allows the city to scale transportation needs when necessary. Here you see some images from CU football game days, and then the map on the right is from the Boulder this year. We do require our providers to provide event management plans, so we work with them prior to the events to identify, okay, this is where we should have additional parking, and this is where we should, direct folks or implement some short-term slow zones or no parking zones, things like this. For example, you were not allowed to take scooters across the Boulder route. So it's really great that we have this flexibility in these uses of technology. And we're using what we've learned from past events and all of our tools to support shared micromobility as an elevated mode choice for Sundance Festival attendees next year. We're also fortunate that both Lime and B-Cycle have top-notch experience with supporting festivals in other cities. So we're learning a lot from our partners as well. I'd like to share a little bit about safety and safety messaging over the past few years. I'll note we have 2025 report incidents from Lime and B-Cycle, but are still processing through the PD reports for 2025. So I do have the PD reports for 2024. Most of the Lime reported incidents were single vehicle falls. And in 2024, Boulder PD had 8 e-bike safety incidents reported. And in 2025, B-Cycle had 13 B-Cycle e-bike safety incidents reported. In 2024, PD had 19 e-scooter safety incidents reported. And in 2025, Lime had 26 Lime e-scooter safety incidents reported. We recognize that safety incidents are likely underreported if there was no property damage or severe damage, but it is important to note that this is overall a safe mode for the number of rides provided. To give some context there, in 2024, of the 777,000 B-Cycle rides, there were 24 total reported safety incidents. This equates to 0.00003% of all rides. And similarly for Lime in 2024, there were 692,000 rides and 55 total reported incidents. This equates to 0.00079% of all rides. So again, sharing that they may be underreported, but it overall is a safe mode for riders. And again, like I mentioned earlier, we've learned that safety messaging and education is key. We have information on which wheels go where on our website. Lime and B-Cycle also conduct in-app messaging demonstrating how to use scooters and bikes properly. In concert with the citywide expansion, the city implemented an education and safety campaign that focused on shared e-scooter usage and parking. This campaign included social and print media, think lawn signs, posters, press releases, social media. Again, part of our intent there is so that both riders and non-riders are seeing the same information and it's not just in an app. And this encouraged shared use of paths, rules of the road for shared micromobility, where to park, and how to ride. This campaign continues and expands both in terms of location and content-wise to have a broader reach. We continue to collaborate with the Share the Path program to expand the reach of the safety messaging. From the onset, equitable approaches to shared micromobility have been a priority for the City of Boulder. Lime and B-Cycle both offer multiple equity-focused programs that center on income-qualified users. Per city code, any provider is required to provide free 30-minute passes to income-qualified riders. B-Cycle also partners with the Boulder Library to offer a Book-a-Bike program, which is essentially like checking out a book at your local library, which I think is an incredible program and just very accessible. And it allows you to check out a B-Cycle for 7 days at a time with your library card. And all Boulder Housing Partners residents receive free B-Cycle passes. Lime is also required to have 10% of their fleet available within identified equity-focused areas. So again, providing this access in addition to the free 30-minute rides. The city also works with local groups, including Boulder Housing Partners, to explore and apply for grants and additional equity program offerings for e-mobility. For example, in late 2026, the city will be working with Boulder Housing Partners, Lime, and B-Cycle, among other partners, to conduct a mobility wallet pilot program for Boulder Housing Partners communities. This will be the first universal basic mobility program of its kind in the state, focusing on e-mobility. The city issued a questionnaire in fall 2025 to assess public opinion on shared micromobility services. The questionnaire was made available in English and in Spanish and received approximately 600 responses. The questionnaire was marketed to both riders and non-riders with the intent of understanding community impact of shared micromobility. Some of the primary goals of the questionnaire included understanding trip purpose for Lime and B-cycle riders, understanding trip replacement of other modes of travel, identifying challenges and areas for improvement for both riders and non-riders, identify reasons for non-compliance of riding and parking rules by Lime e-scooter riders, and understanding the highest demand locations for future B-cycle stations. We learned that common trip purposes for Lime and B-cycle riders include social activities and leisure. We saw that B-cycle is used more than Lime for getting to school and shopping. Riders use B-cycle and Lime in similar frequency, about 40% to access transit. They noted that 40% of riders use shared micromobility sometimes, often, or always to access transit, which illustrates the continued importance of shared micromobility as a first and final mile connection to transit. And this is one of the key goals of the program. Riders have a slight preference for using B-cycle to commute to school, which may be influenced by the fact that all CU Boulder students receive free B-cycle passes with their student fees. Both Lime and B-cycle most frequently replace walking trips. Given the average length of trips, this does make sense. We also learned that an estimated 35 to 50% of trips replace car trips, which again is in line with the national average as I spoke about earlier, which is about 40%. Short response feedback identified that major pain points for non-riders with the shared micromobility program are cost, convenience, and sidewalk parking. We continue to reactively and proactively approach these concerns with the operators and in our upcoming contracts. Short response feedback identified that riders who received a warning or fine for missed parking did not understand the parking rules or found them difficult to follow. This indicates that more education may be helpful to increase parking compliance. Lime e-scooter riders reported that they chose to ride on a sidewalk mostly due to unsafe conditions on roadways. Of note, it is allowable to ride on sidewalks on streets with posted speed limit of 25 miles per hour or higher. And lastly, this was one of our more popular questions. Demand for future B-cycle stations is highest in South Boulder, as you can see in the map here, followed by North Boulder. And this is a common request we get is, can you put a B-cycle station, near my house, near my work, things like that. So it's something that we really wanted to understand from folks. We continue to monitor program performance so we can iterate and make data-driven decisions that are informed by community insights and input. With shared micromobility, we are fortunate to have a fantastic amount of data provided by B-cycle and Lime that helps inform improvements and adjustments. This technology is flexible and allows us to be nimble. We continue to work with community partners like Boulder Chamber Transportation Connections to improve the program and increase access for folks. BCTC manages access for our general improvement districts as well as provides citywide support. We continue to collect community feedback and partner with B-cycle and Lime so we can have a balanced program that aims to meet our city goals and benefit community members. We conducted a competitive RFP in early 2026 and have an intent to award B-cycle and Lime contracts later in 2026. With this, we plan on improving parking management, increase access to Lime and B-cycle stations and corrals citywide, introduce new vehicle types, increase equity offerings and outreach, and monitoring, which is something we'll be able to do soon through Ride Report, and increase discount offerings and large event support. So we have many exciting improvements coming up. And with that, I will leave it to Tab for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Allison. That was really thorough and interesting. Yeah, Trini, go ahead. Questions.
Well, Allison, I'm just like I feel really fortunate to have seen especially like the Lime program, like from the very
start,
when it was a pilot that was introduced by DK, and how it's become something that was in the beginning not so welcomed by the community, and now it's been embraced, and how it has all kind of gone through different stages. And so I really appreciated your presentation, both for B-cycle. Also, I remember when it was announced that the ridership for B-cycle increased 60% when it was electrified, the full fleet was electrified. So that was really exciting and great to remember. And I just have two side note questions. One has to do with safety. Well, of course, it's going to be focused on safety. But it's got to do with two things. Like, one, is there like a weight limit or something that could be just like a geofencing type of, mindset where the scooter will not advance if it goes over a certain weight, just to kind of take charge of these two rider type scenarios that I often see that are absolutely terrifying.
Right.
So maybe something like that. I mean, I don't know if there's already something that, they do to kind of control that, but I don't think so. And maybe a similar fee could be applied as like when they don't park in the right place, which I'm sure, kind of motivates in a negative way, but motivates regardless. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Is there like a weight thing that we could? I know that could get into another conversation that's very uncomfortable, but at the same time, there should be a way to know if there's two people riding opposed to one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
No, Trini, it's a great question. Thank you so much for those questions. Yeah, and it has been fun to see the evolution of both Lime and B-Cycle. I agree. B-Cycle actually, they were introduced in May 2011, so 15 years ago now, which is wild to think back. I remember the red bikes, remember the red pedal bikes. It's actually funny, Kevin and I at B-Cycle in a recent meeting, he shared that they are at the Boulder Museum. They donated one of the original bikes as part of Boulder's shared transportation history, so I thought that was neat. And it has been really neat to see Lime's progression, over the past 5 years. In terms of the double riding, that is a concern we do hear. Lime has a couple things they do. They have been working on, because the weight thing is tricky, right? Because there's a range of weights for folks. But Lime has been working on their pads where you stand on them and making sure that it's obvious that it is just one rider on there and it will stop you. And they did show us this in their demonstration this year when we did the interviews. So I think it's something that we'll continue to be iterating, but I will continue to bring that up with them that, we're still seeing this issue. We need to continue to work on that. They also are working on sort of this thrust technology. So instead of a weight, it's almost like how fast you're moving based on the weight and that sort of thing. So, and again, kind of giving those warnings to folks, but it's a good note and we'll continue to work with them on that. But that the technology of the pad where you stand on it and noting that it's just one person does seem to be pretty promising. So we'll continue to work on that with them.
Yeah, good question.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
coincidentally, just today I was with Kevin Kraus and a representative from the W.W. Reynolds Company at the Table Mesa Shopping Center talking about a B-Cycle station there, for a potential B-Cycle station there. And two young people were on a Lime scooter and whizzed right past us on the sidewalk. And so, yes, it's happening everywhere. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I was amazed reading the memo that it said that in terms of rides per station oriented bike per day, Boulder was second only to Boston, and now you're telling us that we're actually number one. Yay.
We are, yes. And I apologize for not catching that earlier, but I did reach out to NACDO immediately. I said, hey, this is the data I sent you. This isn't lining up. And they reached back out immediately and said, oh, it seemed like an outlier. So we took, and I was like, well, it is. And that's a good thing. We are an outlier. So they kind of needed me to provide and say like, no, this is the data. This is what we're seeing.
They overcorrected us. Okay. Well, yeah, thanks also for showing the demand in different parts of the city for new stations. I always thought South Boulder is the forgotten stepchild of B-Cycle, and but you pointed out North Boulder, I hadn't really noticed, is also lacking. But yeah, I did see in the memo that we should expect 3 new stations in South Boulder this summer. Do you
Yes.
know where those are going to be?
Absolutely. Yes. I've been working with B-Cycle on that, and we're just to share some backend with the city, we do have a revocable permit process for B-Cycle and Lime to place stations in the public right of way. So it does take a little bit of time. I can't just identify a spot and say build tomorrow. So we are in that process right now. Those stations are Table Mesa and Broadway. Broadway and Dartmouth, and and let's see, Moorhead and the bike path kind of right under 36. So those are the stations on city right-of-way. B-Cycle is also working with RTD in their right-of-way at the Table Mesa Park and Ride and the Tantra Drive Park and Ride. So those are on RTD property, so it's a different process and, you know, their own processes. So hopefully those can be moved along as well. But there are 3 on city property that are moving forward. We did part of what we look at is ridership. We reach out to the community and you know, folks in South Boulder would like more B-Cycle stations, so that's a piece of it. And we also try to connect with transit. So those are along transit corridors that can support folks in terms of first and final mile.
Excellent, thanks.
Yes, no problem. Yes, we're hoping for Table Mesa. I'm hoping RTD can move forward on that because that could be really key. And there previously was a B-Cycle station there. So we're hoping that can come back again soon.
Yeah, the important thing is the connectivity to other stations. Yeah, Michael, go ahead.
I had a few things. One, I'm wondering if there's any prospect of improving the on-bike storage for B-Cycle. I know they have a little basket in front, but to the extent people are increasingly likely to use this as part of their daily commute, they might need more storage. And especially if, for example, you know, you're going to do grocery shopping at, say, Table Mesa Shopping Center, you're not going to be putting all that stuff in a backpack plus that little basket. You're going to need a rack on the back to put a pannier or something like that. So I'm wondering if there's any prospect of that being added to those bikes. And let's see, your mention about the affordability and this mobility wallet got me wondering whether or not there is a way to institute a separate program or to fold these into the EcoPass program so that people can kind of do, you know, rely on these things as they would transport in any other mode of non-automobile transportation, just kind of buy it once and make unlimited use of it. So that was the second question, and maybe that's kind of what the mobility wallet thing is. And then I was just finally curious about what tech Lime is looking at for dealing with the sidewalk parking issue, as that, you know, that outside those non-mandatory parking zones, that continues to be an issue. I see it in my neighborhood with some frequency, and I wish, one, that I was in a position to do some kind of, you know, inquire-based enforcement or something to you know, because it's pretty consistently the same folks who aren't getting the message or have gotten the message and just don't care. And so, you know, I see this all the time. It's just a handful of houses there. A Lime scooter parked right in the sidewalk out in the front on a narrow sidewalk, forcing folks with, like, walkers and prams and stuff off into the street to go around it. Like to put an end to that. I know it's much improved, but it's still annoying when one encounters it. So I'm just wondering, like, what are they thinking of doing in that regard? And that's a lot, so I'll shut up.
That's great. No, I've been writing down notes so I can speak to each of those. So I'll start first with the bike storage. Those are great ideas. We can work with B-Cycle. You know, if there's additional options to put some storage on the back, again, you know, like you spoke to, grocery stores, or if you're commuting to work, things like this, it is helpful to have extra storage. I did note in the memo that Lime is also looking at additional devices. So we may look at putting these devices called Lime gliders. So they're similar to e-bikes in exterior parts of the city, like Gun Barrel, where we're not seeing, you know, the ridership from other devices, and there's not B-Cycle stations. So they're kind of potentially fitting another need. They do have additional storage capacity. So we'll learn a lot from that process and see if there is success there, if we need to iterate, that sort of thing. So we'll keep you updated there. Stay tuned. In terms of combining these programs with other programs like the EcoPass, you hit the nail on the head. This is exactly what the Mobility Wallet program with Boulder Housing Partners is. we recently won a grant from the Colorado Energy Office to focus on a mobility wallet, focusing on e-mobility. So I mentioned there were other partners. RTD is one of those other partners. So it is these e-mobility wallets would be for providing funds that that riders could use for Lime, B-Cycle, Colorado Car Share, VIA, RTD, and I think I'm forgetting one. But the intention there is that this is a mobility wallet for essentially all modes except single occupancy or except vehicles, essentially. So we're hoping to learn a lot from this. This is, of course, a focused pilot program. But you know, when we have completed that pilot, I'll certainly share with the Transportation Advisory Board on what we've learned from that, and if there is, you know, potential to expand in other parts of the Boulder or other parts of the state. So more to come there, but it's very much in line with what you're discussing of combining all of those different pieces into one easy to use solution. So we're very excited about that. We'll get started on that later this year. And in terms of the sidewalk parking for Lime e-scooters, so we have a number of proactive and reactive focuses here. So one of the items that we're focusing on with Lime in the new contract that will be starting later this year is we are aiming to have 80% of residents within a quarter mile of a Lime corral. And so essentially that is having you park in a corral. So, and I share 80% because there's Gun Barrel, there's exterior parts of the city where it's not quite as reasonable and we're not seeing that ridership, or there's just not the demand from land uses. So, and again, we are working on that throughout the length of their contract, but we are hoping that that will proactively reduce some of these issues, because I've worked with folks in CPWD and it doesn't matter. They have to move. Lime has to move scooters within 2 hours of being notified, but that's the issue needs to not be there in the first place, right? It needs to be more of a proactive solution as opposed to reactive. So this is one of the, you know, tools in the toolbox we're using for the proactive solutions. Lime is also working on sidewalk technology, so sidewalk detection technology from the device itself, so that they are notified and their staff team is notified, oh, a scooter's knocked over, or a scooter's in a sidewalk parked where it shouldn't be, or it's riding where it shouldn't be. So Lime is working on that technology. While we know technology isn't perfect, and it is, again, another piece of the puzzle there. And the GPS data, you know, is not always quite there with sidewalk detection, but they are continuing to work on that. I know they've been doing it in Chicago for a few years and have seen some success there. So we're using some of these proactive and reactive technologies and programs in order to do that. But that is, you know, that is one of the biggest issues we see is parking on sidewalks, that we continually work with Lime, and they are great partners in that of trying to address these. So more to come on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Go ahead, Trini.
Yeah, one very quick last question. So you mentioned earlier that they had identified certain areas in the city where the speed had to be reduced. Is that something that the device does, or is it just like left to the driver or the rider?
Yes, so
Or
it's something
both?
that the device does automatically.
Oh, cool.
So as you're riding the device, a little turtle comes up, like a slow
Oh,
symbol.
awesome.
I know, which I think is kind of fun. And then it makes a sound and it says you're slowing down, you're slowing down. So it notifies you what's happening. So you're feeling it as a rider. And it slows you down to either the 10 miles per hour, 12 miles per hour, depending on the location, and is also giving you that indication, and it also shows up on your app. So it's showing you in multiple ways what is occurring and why it is occurring. So it's showing you on the app, you are entering a slow zone, you know, your vehicle slowing down. And I will state that if it's ever helpful for a TAB, B-Cycle and Lime are always happy to do little tours and kind of walkthroughs and everything. It's actually part of their contract that when we do have folks, you know, from different cities or anything like this, kind of understand how the system works. So if anyone's ever interested in kind of understanding that rider experience, I know I've found it helpful, especially when we were doing device demonstrations. So always happy to set that up.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that would be super fun. I mean, I've obviously ridden the B-Cycles everywhere, but I'm just kind of scared of the scooters. So maybe.
Yeah, let's do a test run.
Yeah.
That could be really good. I do encourage everyone on our board to use both devices and try them out. I mean, I've had that experience of being automatically slowed down on a Lime scooter, and it's interesting to see where that happens. It's also interesting to kind of experience the challenges with parking. So I had that issue once where it just wouldn't park, and I couldn't figure out what to do, and I was charged a lot of money. And so I'm just, I know this is not unique to me. I mean, this happens, and so we do need to kind of figure out how to solve these issues because community members are having a variety of experiences with all these devices. But it's really encouraging and exciting to see the level of ridership, increasing over time. That we want to hit that million mark for each, for both B-Cycle and Lime every year. And I thank you for reporting on the number of car trips that are replaced by these devices. And I do think it's really interesting that they are primarily replacing walking trips and, largely among students. And, we're working hard to make sure that more people know about connecting transit and their final destination with these devices and helping people understand the devices. I mean, the more that we can do in places like the special districts, like in Boulder Junction, everyone's got a B-Cycle pass. The more we can kind of spread that access, I think the more we'll see. And it is really encouraging to see the numbers go up. And thank you very much for your thorough report. Appreciate your memo as well with all the data. Just one final thought for me is you showed the the share the path signs. Like I've seen the yard signs up around, but there's like a smaller one that's kind of the green sign that says, do these things. And I wonder if those could be mounted on poles at the parking at the Lime Groves, at the parking corrals, because just seeing it when you're taking a scooter to go could really help put it in people's minds, because it's very straightforward. It's just like, do this, don't do this, And I think people really need to be reminded of that repeatedly. Like, you're not on the sidewalk, you're on the street, you're, one person, and all these, everything that's on that sign, I think is just really helpful for people to see repeatedly throughout their experience. So the more of those we could have mounted around would be really helpful, I think.
Yeah, that's a terrific idea. We'll get some more of those up. I have some in the office. And again, I think it's a great thing because that way both riders and non-riders are seeing the same information and they all are understanding what the rules of the road are, which is just always really helpful for folks to see the same thing.
Well, and actually that wasn't my last comment. Go ahead. So for example, like I observed today, this is not an unusual observation for two people who are clearly under age 18 riding a scooter together on a sidewalk, like the nexus of all these different, violations. How do we solve the age issue and the access issue? I mean, it's not something that's easy to do with the app. I don't have an answer there. I mean, I think that, a lot of young people who now have fare-free access to RTD but they have a mobile phone and a wallet, that they can use to pay for Lime. It's challenging, right, to help our community members adhere to those rules. What's your current thinking?
Yeah, it's a great question, Darcy. And we've talked with both Lime and B-Cycle about this. So there's no city in the US with Lime that allows 16 plus. It's all 18 plus in the US. It is more common in Europe to have 16 plus or lower. And there's a few cities in Canada that do allow 16 plus. So there is that challenge that they've spoken about. They've had discussions with other cities, but no other cities in the US are currently doing 16 plus. There are some cities with B-Cycle that do allow 16 plus. So there is some precedent there. I think there is a way we could tie this into things like driver's license. So kind of some pre-established bench line that, people have taken, some tests and really kind of focused on some of that information. It is something we'll have to work on with the city attorney's office to determine how we would move forward with that. But I think there would be appetite and a path forward for that driver's license kind of age that we could move forward with looking at that. Again, needing to work with the city attorney's office to kind of determine those options there. But that's kind of where we're looking at right now.
Yeah, I know it's a real challenge because there isn't like, people fudge their birth dates and
I know.
it's really it's hard. I
Yeah.
mean, how do you do it? And maybe again it's more signage, it's more education, it's more intervention on the part of the school system and whatever. I think there's probably a combination of methods.
I
Michael,
agree
what
with
did
you. Yeah, there's no silver bullet. Just sorry, really quick. There's no silver bullet, like you explained. It's a number of different things. Lime has also shared they had looked into face technology before, but there's other issues with that, so it's not something they're moving forward with. So it is they've looked at a number of other things, but we're of course always happy to revisit things.
Yeah, just increasing the friction somehow of gaining access.
Yes.
Yeah, Michael, go ahead.
I was this discussion about age. I was just thinking, on the one hand, these are great devices for kids to have access to, provided they're not going too fast. And so I was wondering if there was a way to partner with the school district to help you with age determination and identity determination in those who are registered to use the devices. And then to use that information also to throttle the devices in the same way your slow zones do, so that they're not going too fast. And maybe that would, address some of the issue. Because they're going to use them. And in this case, I'm not sure I'm opposed to kids using them. I just don't want them marauding, dangerously through the streets. But if they don't go that fast, that's not even a temptation. If it, think about what a significant contribution these e-scooters could make, for example, to morning drop-off at a school. That could be massive, right? Because it's right now it's this, conga line of vehicles just spewing gas and the whole, it's just like drop-off takes way longer than it ought to. And something like this, if they're not going to unreasonably fast, could really really improve things without it. The one of the things I like about it, right, is it doesn't require any massive changes to infrastructure. You can use existing infrastructure with these devices, so long as they're not, going ridiculously fast. So, and I'm sure Lime would love it, because it would have a whole bunch more customers, and what a great use of some kind of mobility wallet.
It's complicated,
It is
there are
complicated.
legal, there are legal implications, and it's just an insurance and just a lot of things that.
And that's what I kind of wanted to bring up. I mean, I totally agree with Michael. I think it's such a wonderful idea. And I think the issue is that the legality, I mean, maybe you know more about that, but I mean, I'm just like aghast at like the current situation where what if there's a crash and there's a serious injury, and who's responsible for that? I mean, is it the parent? Is it, because there's a reason currently why I would assume the age is 18, right? I mean, or that's the discussion we were having. So there must be something, and yes, the little turtle, I love that idea. But there must be like a waiver or something that, additional that parents would have to sign, or I don't know. There must be some technicality that could fix that, but most definitely has to be addressed in multiple ways, right?
Absolutely.
I think that's exactly the architecture, anyone would use. Any lawyer would advise you, yes, you're going to need to get parental approval to allow the use be low. And it's the same architectures we have, say, with the distinction between e-bikes and e-motos, right? When they go beyond a certain speed or have certain power, then you need a license. The vehicle needs to be registered, you need to have insurance. But if you were to lower the speed and lower the torque and make these things accelerate more slowly, which are all things that any electronic device can do, any of these e-mobility devices can do, then they become less of a menace. And then the rest is insurance, and that's for actuarial scientists to resolve, right? That line can figure that into their pricing architecture. So it seems to me it's a nut that could be cracked. It just going to take some work to crack it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if the speed governor can be tied to date of birth or like range of age, like I don't know how that can happen. The safety data, the lack of serious injury crash data on these devices in Boulder is a testament to our infrastructure quality, I believe. And so I appreciate that because like in Denver, for instance, they had, I think, 5 fatalities on Lime e-scooters last year. And so it's really important that we are, tracking that data too, and that it's clear that our infrastructure quality is facilitating safe use of these vehicles. So thank you for that as well.
Absolutely. No, and that was an interesting thing we learned from the questionnaire the city conducted last fall is if folks were riding where they weren't supposed to, it was because it was unsafe infrastructure. So it really speaks to the need for they want the safe infrastructure. They will be using it if it's there. So it's a great point.
Yeah, good. Great. Well, any other questions or feedback from TAB members? Sounds like we've had a good thorough discussion. So thank you so much, Allison. Really appreciate your presentation and all the data that you've provided us.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah. Okay, and we have one more staff presentation this evening. Our next order of business is to hear about an update on the CO7 and Arapahoe Avenue right-of-way plan. Blythe, do you want to introduce Garrett, or Garrett, do you want to jump right in? You guys decide.
I would love to just briefly say that, as you all know, the East Arapahoe is part of our core arterial network, and one of those streets on which high injury crashes disproportionately occur. And you all are familiar with the BAT lanes that have recently been put in that will help CO7 work better as a regional option. Our multi-use path and safety project also will make the streets safer for pedestrians, cyclists, and transit users, people that are getting on and off the bus or people that are just walking or biking locally, to make the street safer for pedestrians, for everybody. And beyond the limit of work of those immediate projects that we're doing, our right-of-way plan provides the authority for the city to assure right-of-way space is preserved and the infrastructure is constructed when properties along the street are redeveloped. So with that, I'll hand it over to Garrett Slater, who can walk us through more details on the right-of-way plan.
I just wanted to clarify the word you use, BAT stands for bus and turn lanes.
Thank you, Michael.
Good evening, TAB. I'm Garrett Slater. I'm the Senior Manager for Capital Projects for our Department of Transportation and Mobility. It's good to be with you this evening. And so my presentation will include some background and context of the Arapahoe CO7 corridor, some of the project goals and objectives, why there are right-of-way needs, and then what the purpose of the right-of-way plan is for. So with that, I will remind everyone that the East Arapahoe corridor goes from 28th Street to the eastern city limit, and it is also identified as CO7 or State Highway 7 on the state highway system. And in 2014, a transportation plan recommendation outlined that this corridor should be studied. And so in 2015, that effort began. And over the course of a few years and many sessions with community working groups, the conclusion of that effort was the East Arapahoe Transportation Plan, which was recommended and accepted by City Council in August of 2018. And then the following year, the recommendations for East Arapahoe were also included in the 2019 Transportation Master Plan and carried forward as part of the Low Stress Walk and Bike Plan. So all of these recommendations and corridor studies have supported our comprehensive Vision Zero and safe system goals for our network. And over the course of the last decade plus of work, this has been an ongoing partnership with the Colorado Department of Transportation, or CDOT, Federal Highway Administration, or FHWA, and Denver Regional Council of Governments, or DRCOG, and RTD, the transit agency. Also of note is that Arapahoe is a CAN, Core Arterial Network, primary investment corridor. And so it outlines, as you all are aware by now, the CAN outlines a connected system of bike lanes, intersection enhancements, pedestrian facilities, and bus system upgrades. And of course, Arapahoe is an important corridor, perhaps among the most important east-west corridors in the city. It is the longest continuous route east-west and intersects a number of our primary north-south CAN corridors as well. And it's not only important to us in the city, but it's important regionally. So in 2020, in collaboration with a number of our regional partners, the city under the guidance of CDOT, who outlined the importance of CO7 as a regional corridor, the city worked with CDOT in a series of corridor-wide recommendations. And so the Boulder segment was identified as segment A, and as part of that effort, a 15% design was developed. And CDOT continues to play an important role in the investment and the enhancement of the CO7 corridor, as evidenced by the project that turned the outside general purpose lane to a bus and business access lane last year as part of the repaving and overlay work that CDOT provided. So a very important part of the regional network, tying into Chris's earlier presentation, noting the importance of having travel corridors that provide people travel choices as they travel from inside and outside of the region. So this graphic is depicting some of the recent efforts. As highlighted, the 15% design was completed just a year or so ago. The bus and turn lanes project was completed in 2025, and the final design is underway now between 28th Street and 38th Street. The Arapahoe Safety Improvement Project is slated for construction in 27-28 timeframe. And then in 25, we also had the multi-use path and bus stop upgrade project, which was concluded just before the repaving effort by CDOT. And not highlighted here, but also important, was that we were able to take the Excel funds from our new franchise agreement and conduct utility undergrounding of all the overhead power lines between Foothills and the eastern limit of the city, and prior to all of this construction activity taking place. So all of this is setting the stage for improved bus service with combined headways projected to be every 7 to 10 minutes along the corridor. The Brighton to Boulder Flyer looking to get started later this summer, and that will provide dedicated transit service between the two communities. Currently, Arapahoe is served by the jump between Erie, Lafayette, and downtown Boulder, and so it'll be great to have the bus lanes and facilities in place for the flyer. So as we continue to work to build out the vision of the corridor, this provides an illustration of what it will look like. As you all know, we have the bus lanes in place. We have multi-use path in some places. We do not have the protected bike lanes as shown here. And so that will be an effort that we're looking to implement with some of our next phase of work and projects. And particularly important is making sure we've got the space to be able to implement better, safer crossings for cyclists and pedestrians at intersections, which is depicted by this graphic of a typical intersection along the Arapahoe corridor. So as we make recommendations in our transportation plans, it's commonplace that with updates to the transportation master plan that we have identified connections. And then further, when the city undertakes sub-area or community sub-plans, that there are connections plans identified. And so this slide is showing a screen grab of the connections plan or the North Boulder sub-community plan, just showing you the typical types of connections that are depicted on a map with corresponding street sections. And in 2022 and 2024, the East Boulder sub-community plan, which goes from Foothills Parkway to the eastern city limit, also made a series of recommendations for connections in and around that sub-area, including improvements to Arapahoe Avenue, which resulted in this representative cross-section being what we'd like to implement. And so that is the work that was represented by the CDOT 15% design and is also being designed as part of the final design phase between 28th Street and 38th Street. And is depicted here in our right-of-way and easements needs between 28th Street and 38th Street. So what this graphic is showing, my mouse likes to jump late, so apologize for that. This is showing the permanent, temporary easement needs as well as the right-of-way needs along the corridor. And what you are seeing is that there are generally going to be slivers of land that are needed along these frontages to accommodate the space we need for the enhancement and addition of bike lanes and better pedestrian facilities. So between 28th Street and 38th Street, the capital project will be acquiring these easements with our public dollars. But we also know that it's going to take us some time to be able to build out the full corridor, and that there is a ripe development opportunity throughout the corridor to the east of Foothills Parkway. And so the purpose of having a right-of-way plan is to make sure that as development comes online, we have the land and space needed to be able to fully implement a consistent treatment of the cross-section and the Arapahoe preliminary and design, as well as in the connections plans, and to make sure that particularly at the intersections that we don't space constrain ourselves so that we can build the protected facilities that make not just getting along, but being able to get across these intersections. And so we have prepared a right-of-way plan for the segment from Foothills east to the East City limit that makes sure that we are preserving the space necessary. And this plan will be going to the planning board for recommendation and approval, and then ultimately to City Council for recommendation and approval. And so you all as Transportation Advisory Board might be asking, well, what's our role in this? This is primarily a land use action. So we are not looking to modify or change any of the transportation recommendations. We are not looking to modify any of the connections plans. So we are looking to implement all of the recommendations in those plans and in the connections plans. And we just need to make sure we've got the land and the space to be able to fully build it out, because there's not sufficient right of way to be able to build it as it currently stands. And so we need to make sure that we've got those easements laid out so that as development comes online, we again don't have buildings that preclude us from being able to build out the full treatment of the corridor. So this is a land use question and approval. But we wanted to make sure that you all, as the Transportation Board, are in the loop about the current efforts on the corridor and what's happening in terms of presentation to Planning Board and Council. And so with that, I will ask, does Tab have any questions about the intent and purpose of the Arapahoe right-of-way plan?
Thank you, Garrett. Go ahead, Trini. I have some as well.
So, hi, Garrett. Thank you so much for your presentation. I mean, my only comment, everything looks fabulous, and I'm so glad that there's so many things that are taken into consideration. But as we move forward and as the past has shown us, I just don't understand how the bike lane is not going to be protected from the get-go. I think that that's essential. I don't know if it's because of where it's going to be placed and there's that buffer with the trees, or I mean, maybe that's just the ideal case scenario. But I think that anything that we plan moving forward, especially when you have the word bike in there, should include a protected bike lane. I just don't, I think people won't use it as much as if it were protected, just from experience and even from personal experience. But see, that's what I wanted to ask you. Like, is that a buffer, a real buffer? I mean, is that, or is that just like the dream scenario?
Yeah, so the proposed treatment for the Arapahoe corridor is a physically separated bike lane. So what you're seeing
great.
here is the bus lane in each direction, separated by a planting strip, and then the bike lane, and then a sidewalk or multi-use path on the outside of that. And so we presently have all the elements you see here on the Arapahoe corridor, except for the protected bike lane. And so that is the work we are underway with now, is doing the design and finding the land that we need to be able to get the protected bike facility implemented along the corridor.
But protected from what? From the pedestrians? I'm just, or separating it from the pedestrians. I'm just very confused. Or is it the tree? What part is?
So when we talk about protected, we're talking about protected from vehicles. So the bike lane will sit back away from vehicle traffic, but also separated from the pedestrian path or the multi-use path, as we've done on recent corridors like Colorado Avenue and on 30th Street, where we have a sidewalk that's separate from the bike lane.
Right now, what has gone in is the multi-use path.
Right. Today,
so people are riding on the multi-use
it's just
path.
a shared use facility. So that is not the end goal. We want a separated facility for cyclists.
So like a raised, I mean, on Colorado, it's just like a raised sidewalk, right? I mean, that's what the bike lane is.
Right.
Currently.
It's a sidewalk level. So it's not street level. It's a sidewalk elevation level bike lane. Yes.
Like at 30th. Well, my understanding from the memo on this issue is that west of 38th Street, we have funding for this, and east of 38th Street, we have to rely on waiting for property owners to develop and then require them to.
So I would say that it's more likely that we will see private development implement portions of the segment east of Foothills Parkway. We're not saying that we're not ever going to have city or public investment in the segment east of Foothills. It's just there's likely to be development or redevelopment occurring before we as a city are able to get there. And we don't want the development of those properties to build inadequate facilities or not provide the space and the land for us to be able to in the future build the facilities we need. So this right-of-way plan preserves that space to make sure that we have the right-of-way or the easements needed to build a continuous separated bike lane treatment.
Right.
Yeah. Trini, did you have more or?
No, that's basically like my main thing is just, I just don't want us to go and have to fix something in the future. You know, I mean, like but yeah. I understand now. I just thought that this was like the dream scenario, you know, and I wasn't really clear on this is exactly what's going to happen. So, I mean, I think that the tree does, or the planting or whatever is going to be there does serve as a buffer, and the bus itself serves as a buffer, you know, so yeah, I think that this is, I'm good.
Well, and so Garrett, with new development east of 38th and east of Foothills, developments will also be subject to the TDM ordinance, right? Does any of that build out of these facilities fall under the TDM ordinance requirements, or is that strictly having to do with kind of parking and EcoPass and all the other things?
Typically, it is going to be providing the micromobility choices or eco passes or solutions
Not
of
the
similar
infrastructure.
nature. Correct.
Mhm. Yeah, right. Okay. Interesting. Well, okay. So I have several comments about all of this. You can stop sharing if you
Okay.
want, but so Arapahoe is the single place, the CAN corridor that the chamber and other entities are hearing the most about right now because of the implementation of the BAT lanes in advance of the bus rapid transit and also having to do with like other kind of connected infrastructure projects. People are confused. What we're hearing from business owners is confusion about how to navigate that infrastructure and concern about the impact of that infrastructure on their businesses. And what this plan describes and what your memo describes is a further kind of requirement of businesses to kind of be part of this plan with the right-of-way plan. And so I'm curious about what you're doing. So not since 2018 have people really deeply been involved in this plan. It's time to make sure that everyone along this corridor really thoroughly, deeply understands what's coming, how it's going to affect them, and how they can, be part of it. It's kind of like, when we were looking at the transportation maintenance fee, like that was all kind of decided long ago. And people today were saying, what is this? And I think that you're going to find exactly the same kind of reaction to this plan, and the information in this memo is like, oh, all of that was decided pre-COVID, and so much has changed since then, including our transit ridership and other things. And businesses are very, very concerned about what's happening on Arapahoe. And so I want to know kind of what you're planning to do, what you and the other people on the East Arapahoe team are planning to do to do that outreach and to engage people and to really understand, to help them understand what's coming and how it's going to affect them, but also, how are we going to help people understand how to navigate all these changes?
Yes, I can speak to. So I would say there have been other community efforts since the East Arapahoe Transportation Plan, right? The East Boulder Subcommunity Plan had a fairly robust community engagement effort, of which the transportation connections got a lot of attention. And so there were a number of hearings at Planning Board as well as at Council about the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan. But by the time the actual physical construction gets in place along this segment of Arapahoe, I agree, Darcy, that there will be people that have forgotten that those activities occurred. And so if it happens via development, I don't know that we as transportation staff we typically don't have a role in proactive communication beyond reminding people about these planning documents that provided the approval for these measures and treatments to be able to be implemented. If it is a city capital project, as is the case on 28th to 38th Street, there's a lot of engagement that will be occurring and a lot of one-on-one property owner meetings that will be taking place specifically on that segment over the course of the next year.
Okay. Mike?
Yeah, I just wanted to flag something I became aware of recently from a different perspective, because from my perspective, I love the sidewalk level bike lanes on 30th and the street level protected bike lanes on Baseline, and now the floating bus stops going in there. But I recently learned that I guess at least in California, there have been some concerns from disability rights activists about floating bus stops and whether there are hazards to getting to the bus stop, crossing bike lanes, and just wanted to make sure we're engaging in this process with that community.
Yes, absolutely. And all of our projects, that's an important step that we take. And as we continue to advance the Arapahoe design, that will continue to be the case.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I probably spend more time on Nextdoor than is good for my mental health. And have seen a lot of concern along the lines of what Darcy's suggesting is out there about, the impact of the bus lanes, the bus only lanes on traffic. And I would imagine that right of way, I fully support the right of way strategy. I think it makes complete sense. I'm just worried that there's opportunity for people to misunderstand what this is about and to not understand how important it is that it gets done. So this, for me, is maybe less an occasion for engagement, especially the kind of engagement where you know what you're going to hear before you ask the question, but more an opportunity for communication to let the folks who are being affected know not only why we're doing this, right? Like, what the grand picture is, but also to communicate that this is staged, right? A lot of the pushback or grievance I hear is, and I totally get why it's being staged, but you said, Garrett, you're saying we're setting the stage for this improved transit, right? But what people see is people building bus lanes for buses that aren't there. And so I think part of the strategy is like, yes, this is staged. The buses are coming. Don't worry, we're not doing, we're not building stuff for no reason. So that's I think an important communication piece that I don't think, if it's happened, it hasn't happened in a way that's kind of breaking through to some of the folks. But I also think it's really critical that you communicate to folks, particularly the businesses, but really everyone, what happens if you don't do this stuff, right? You were on Arapahoe, given the growth in places like Erie, if you don't implement this strategy, you're looking at transportation catastrophe on Arapahoe that will have absolutely catastrophic effects on all the businesses there. That's what should be first and foremost in their mind. Not, well, am I going to be losing, a little bit of my right of way, or are people going to be confused about turning into my property, or what? I don't really know what their concerns are, but I would imagine that any and all of them pale in comparison to congestion on Arapahoe becoming such that people are no longer willing to use that corridor unless they're absolutely compelled to. And that, to me, is the take-home message for anyone, is that this strategy, even though its rationale is not yet evident, at least as I understand it, the strategy is meant to forestall a coming catastrophe. And that, I don't think people got that message. I think they see bus lines going in on a street that, where there's not many buses. The congestion isn't yet such that they can understand the rationale for all of this. And I worry that that's creating like a negative vibe that is totally unnecessary. Yeah. So I love the project. I just think communication around it is missing its mark somehow.
Yeah, nobody understands what 15% design means, right? And it's not about the 15% design, it's about the vision and how that's come to be, and the 7 to 10 minute headways, which sound amazing, right? And all the opportunities that people are going to have, and showcasing those transit stops and saying, these transit stops are near your business. You're going to get more people passing by, it's really about that, right? So yeah, absolutely, Michael. I think we all have a lot of work to do to make sure that that vision is well understood and that people are buying into it. Go ahead, Blythe.
Thank you, Darcy. And I think I'm probably underscoring a lot of what's been said, but I just wanted to emphasize and highlight that I'm certainly eager to proactively communicate as much as possible. And a couple of points, I wanted to really emphasize Michael's point and tie it back to, and Garrett, feel free to add to and or correct, but the right-of-way plan concept was something that we didn't do in the city that I came from. And it becomes very challenging. As you mentioned, I don't think this is what you were referring to necessarily by catastrophe, but if a single development happens in a way that does not accommodate the space that we need to assure the contiguity of this project, then it can significantly impact the effectiveness of walkability and bikeability and transitability on the corridor. So that's one way that I think about it, is that is the project at hand that Garrett has presented as the right-of-way plan to assure that those parts that we can't get to yet, that will get built by developers over time, get built in a way that conforms, so that we don't have one situation where one development kind of ruins the whole thing. And then secondly, I just want to tie back to the Boulder Valley employee survey, which is, again, just a testament to the longitudinal aspect of this work, that it takes a really, really long time. And that's in no way not intended to be empathetic. I'm just, again, underscoring all those points. I think this work that we're doing on Arapahoe is not dissimilar to work that we've done on 28th Street, on our pathway system, on a number of our projects for years and years and years, that shows a significant way that enables people to be able to move around in more active ways in our community. And then also the aspect of the BVES that illustrates how increasingly hard it is for us to combat the increasing distances where people are choosing to live for affordability reasons, and why I think that enabling enhanced transit and pairing that with the CO7 improvements that are to come, again, empathetic to folks that don't understand now, but I just think the more that we can, and I will do the best that I can to tell that story so that people understand how this fits into the big picture over time. And when we have bus rapid transit traveling from the east, I think it will make a huge, huge difference what we're doing here. And then I also just wanted to highlight some great work on our website that explains what the BAT lanes are intended to do as well, that we can try to promote as well as we move forward with these projects. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Blythe. And I really appreciate your what you said about the timing and like how long transportation projects take. And it's really true. I mean, these are expensive, heavy duty, long-term projects. And that's why the mandate for continuous communication is so important, because, people are constantly kind of changing along the corridor, right? And people we need to ensure that vision remains in the kind of public consciousness so that everyone is moving toward that goal, right? And I know that we can kind of, for those of us in it, it can feel like, oh, we've said it plenty of times, but that's not what we're hearing from businesses and people in the corridor every day, right? What we're hearing from them is, what's going on? I don't understand. What is that about? How do I navigate this? How does this work? Why is this happening? And so it's really, really important. I mean, that long-term vision and the awareness of all the layers of projects that all of these, visions and plans really require. We've got to tell that story better. And we need mechanisms that kind of keep it out in the public consciousness routinely. So, we should.
If I could just say a couple more parts in response to what you're highlighting, Darcy, as well as Michael. So I will share with you all, I am one of the folks that travels CO7 frequently because I do live in Erie. And so I travel both by car and on the jump to get to and from Boulder. And so I have lots of anecdotal experience of what Arapahoe's been like pre and post bus lane implementation. And my observation is generally that the queues and the congestion continues to be where it was pre-installation, which is where the number of traffic lanes goes from one general purpose to two general purpose. There in front of at the intersection with 62nd. That's the queues in the morning are going over the hill there from 75th, and in the evening it's in the same place. And in the part where the bus lanes are, more or less the queues don't appear to be any more severe. And that's evidenced by CDOT now telling CDOT staffer in regional planning meetings telling people that these bus lanes are a success. And that's great to hear, because they were naysayers and doubters from the onset, and we had to do a whole lot of modeling to demonstrate otherwise to them. But I hear you that there's confusion for folks on how to use those lanes, and I see it myself that people are making right turns out of the through lane and not out of the bus lane when they have every right to be able to making those right turns. And the 28th Street project will be concluding this summer. And at that conclusion, we will also have full bus lanes on 28th between Pearl all the way to Iris. And therein lies another opportunity for us to provide proactive education to the community and to travelers about how they can use these bus lanes because can probably be a similar theme happening on 28th as you're hearing on Arapahoe, that there's uncertainty and confusion about how to use the lanes. And so I hear you, and sounds like we as a team need to think about how to get that message out there in a stronger and better way so that there's less confusion.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Garrett. I appreciate that. And I think, your observations are really important. And I'm glad to hear that CDOT is, kind of on board and recording, data that supports the actions taken. And that's wonderful. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a communications issue. And so let's work on that together.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Anybody else? Any comments? Okay. Thank you so much, Garrett. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Presentation, and we look forward to hearing more about how that all comes together and whatever we can do to support the right-of-way plan as it goes forward. Let us know. Okay, so now we're moving into matters from staff. The state level legislative update is on deck.
I will do a brief introduction of Heather Stauffer, who am I seeing on Jean's? Okay. Without further ado, I will hand over to Heather for our legislative update.
I'm not sure why it's saying Jean. I think I maybe used your link. So sorry, Jean.
No, I think that's right. Sorry about that, Heather. Thank you.
I'll just change my name really quick. All right. Thank you, guys. Let me go ahead and share my screen. This will be the most difficult part for me, so hang tight. And I just asked for a share request, so let me know. Okay, here we go. Okay, can you guys see my screen? And I'm gonna do this in presenter mode.
Yes.
All right, you able to see my slides?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so I will try to keep this brief because I know that you guys have had a very full agenda tonight. So I wanted to come on here and give you a quick overview of the 2026 legislative session as it relates to transportation legislation specifically. So I'm going to be talking through the legislative session bills and actions that the city was involved with. And I'm also going to just give a brief overview on what we expect for the rest of the year and going into 2027. So there were approximately 626 bills introduced this session, and of that, around 446 moved forward to the governor's desk. We tracked about 129 of those bills, and that just means that they were on my radar. I was watching them. The city took active positions on 58 bills this session. If you're interested and want to see the entire list of bills that we took positions on, you can look on the city's website on our intergovernmental affairs page. There's a tab for bills of interest to the city that will take you to the bill dossier. So as I mentioned, 58 bills we took active engagement on. I think that the number one issue this year, the session was definitely defined by the budget and continuing fiscal pressure on the budget. Evolving some federal state dynamics and a limited capacity for new spending was very, very prevalent. Transportation governance, funding, and traffic safety emerged as central themes as well, which I will get into. And once again, JBC, as in years past, leaned on some transportation funding sources to help balance the budget, which was which was kind of a bummer for us, but was something that we pushed back against quite a bit. So I just wanted to highlight once again some city advocacy partners. We talked about this in my previous presentation. We work very closely with advocacy partners outside the city. Many of those are listed here. Most of them are involved in transportation legislation, notably Northwest Mayors and Commissioners Coalition, and then of course DRCOG. And seeing Darcy on here reminds me that I really need to put the chamber up here as a partner, because we work very, very closely with the Boulder Chamber as well throughout the session. So a few overarching themes for the session as they relate to transportation. First, we saw RTD reform, which has been a conversation at the Capitol for several years now. Last year, they passed legislation which authorized the RTD Accountability Committee, which made recommendations. Those recommendations then went on to inform Senate Bill 150, which was passed this year. Secondly, funding impacted everything this year. I touched on this a little bit earlier on. The JBC cut about $1 billion from the state budget in order to balance the budget. Transportation was not exempt from this, and they saw cuts that we worked to defend throughout the budget process as much as possible. We also took several positions on legislation related to traffic safety that dealt with increases in penalties, impaired driving measures, and AVIS policies as well. So Senate Bill 150, modernizing RTD, this is a huge bill. So the summary is very, very much condensed here, but the bill very much focuses largely on the board makeup and the districts in RTD currently. Many felt that RTD's 15-member board was too large and that it needed to be condensed. So the bill, reduces the board from 15 to 9 members. That's 5 elected and 4 would be appointed by the governor. And that's starting in January of 2029. The districts to reflect this change will be redrawn by the state's Independent Redistricting Commission by population. It also increases pay and looks to make the board more professionalized. The governor appointments have to meet specific requirements around expertise and geographic diversity. One of those appointments must come from a list provided by DRCOG as well. The bill also sets out some specific goals for the new board. Namely, it requires them to increase growth throughout the district, and it requires a paratransit study and report to the General Assembly. The city was concerned that 5 elected districts wouldn't provide adequate representation for our region. We wanted to ensure that we would be grouped with communities that have similar values around transit as we do. And so while we were largely supportive of the bill and the changes, we did ask the sponsors and the governor to increase the number of electeds from 5 to 7. So you'll see that our position is in an amend position, but I would characterize that as a friendly amend. We also advocated to lower the number of signatures needed for candidates to get on the ballot. It started off as introduced, it was 1,000, and then we asked for it to be lowered around 500. It was eventually lowered back down to 250 where it currently stands. And that was in order to ensure that we weren't unnecessarily eliminating people who wanted to run for the board by making it overly cumbersome. Northwest MCC was also able to secure an amendment to this bill that requires RTD to engage with sub-regional service councils throughout the communities. They also look to keep ridership out of the board appointments formula, since it would likely favor Denver and other large jurisdictions over smaller suburban areas like Boulder. So they were successful in getting those amendments and keeping that ridership requirements out. Unfortunately, we were not successful in increasing the size of the elected board to 7. That was just something that the governor and the sponsors were not open to. We had many, many jurisdictions asking for that, and other other changes, and they were not open to that. So unfortunately, we didn't get that, but happy to say that we did reduce the signatures and get some increased language around that sub-regional service councils. A little bit more about transportation funding. House Bill 1065. This is a bill that allows local governments to partner with transit agencies to establish transit investment areas financed through state sales tax increment revenues, so TIF, if you're familiar. It's a new tool for funding transit infrastructure. It also pairs transit with transit financing with housing, which is something that's very important to the city of Boulder. So we were happy to support this bill, happy to see it signed into law and passed. Another transportation funding related, Senate Bill 172. This was a Front Range Passenger Rail District, a procedural step for positioning the Front Range Passenger Rail District to go to the ballot, potentially in November of 2026, to ask the voters for a sales tax increase to build on the joint service agreement. We have long been a supporter of the joint service agreements and an expansion thereof. It does redefine the district boundaries to include municipalities and metro districts with 20% of their population within 5 miles of a station. And then it aligns district elections with the statewide election process as well. I think notably, you may have seen in the news, North Glen was carved out of that legislation. I think they're thinking that by condensing this down, you're really going to hit the people who are going to use this the most and have the best chance of passing a ballot measure by really targeting the people who would use this. So we were happy to support that one as well, and that was passed and signed into law as well. We have not heard, and Jean, correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't heard yet whether that will actually go to the ballot in November. I know that RTD has okayed it, but I don't know. I think they're waiting on polling. So let me know if that's outdated information.
That's correct, Heather.
Okay. So we'll be watching that for changes there. I did want to mention House Bill 1430. This bill is a proactive response to Initiative 175 that will appear on the ballot this year. That ballot measure is estimated to divert around $540 to $700 million in sales tax revenue away from the state budget. It is intended to codify in the Constitution that transit funding can only be used for roads. So, that's kind of where they're at. So what this bill does in response to that, it reduces certain transportation taxes and fees if that initiative is passed in November, and only if that initiative is passed in November. So it essentially sweeps a large portion of the funding that would go to this initiative if passed. And the goal here is to make the initiative not worth it for the proponents to run. So they are using this as kind of a nuclear option, it's been described as, to try to convince the proponents to pull the initiative completely. The latest that I've heard on this is that Speaker Pro Tem Basenecker is negotiating with the proponents of Initiative 175, and we should know pretty soon here whether they're going to pull that or they're going to move forward. So that I have a little awaiting symbol on there because there's more to come there. Multimodal. So this was one of the bills that we worked really hard in during the budget process. The Multimodal Options Fund has in the past received $10.5 million from the general fund each year. Last year, that fund was eliminated because of the budget. House Bill 1399 was a budget orbital bill that would have eliminated the transfer completely for the rest of time. So we worked with many different advocacy groups local governments, Northwest MCC, environmental groups, and we were able to save the infrastructure around that multimodal options funding, but the funding will be, the transfer from general fund will be eliminated for 3 years. But after that 3 years, it will resume. So we should be able to, hopefully in the future, the budget outlook is not going to be as grim and we can continue to get the multimodal funding that we have all so enjoyed. So where have I lost? Okay. I mentioned traffic safety bills that we took positions on. A lot of these speak to pedestrian safety, bicycle safety, and they really speak to and enhance our Vision Zero goals for the city. Senate Bill 35 increases civil penalties for improper passing and excessive speeding. To improve roadway safety. House Bill 1242 requires first-time DUI offenders to hold an interlock restricted license for 9 months and then shifts the device costs from a state fund to manufacturer-provided discounts. Essentially, it just makes it easier for people to afford these interlockant devices. And then Senate Bill 72 clarifies criminally negligent homicide includes proximately causing a death while operating a motor vehicle with criminal negligence. So this strengthens accountability for fatal crashes, particularly with pedestrians and bicyclists. Oh, I should have mentioned, we supported all 3 of those. All 3 of them passed. We were happy to see all 3 of those passed. 2 others that I'll mention, changes to the AVIS system. This was a really odd bill. We were in an amend position on this bill, and it was a little bit frustrating. The main change that we were frustrated about was it establishes a penalty structure for AVIS violations. It sets a cap on how much of a fine you can what's the word I'm trying to think. It sets a cap on the fines to $120 for violations of 25 miles per hour or more over the speed limit. So that, but by doing that, they actually took out language in statute that allows City of Boulder to issue reckless driving tickets through AVIS. So we alerted the sponsors to that. They seem to think that the AVIS systems themselves make that determination. And despite us telling them that, no, it's actually a human, you have to go to court, they did not want to put that language back in. So we were disappointed that didn't happen. And I'm hoping in a future session to clear that up, because it is a huge safety tool that we use in the city. And it applies to the people who are speeding the most, 25 miles per hour or over. So if you think about Boulder's speed limits, that's 45 miles an hour in a 20-mile-an-hour zone, right? So that was a frustrating one. You'll see where our position is amend. That was passed and signed. The last one I'll mention is Senate Bill 132, which is the voluntary alcohol breath test. That requires a law enforcement officer to offer a driver involved in a collision causing a death or suspected serious bodily injury the opportunity to voluntarily submit to a preliminary breath alcohol screening test. This is the Magnus law that was signed into law in Boulder. So we were happy to support that as well and happy to see that signed. So looking ahead, obviously the general election in November is going to shape the makeup of the legislature. All 65 House seats are up for election, and I think half of the Senate seats are up. So that could change, change the faces that we see down there. We are also obviously expecting changes in leadership. The House Speaker, the Speaker of the House is up for, is term limited. So we'll have a new Speaker of the House. We'll also likely have a new Majority Leader in the House. We will obviously have a new governor in office, and that will shape the priorities that we see down there. The budget outlook is not great for next year either, unfortunately. Some are saying that the current budget is already out of balance, which is unfortunate as well. So these next few months should shed some more light on that. We'll get some budget forecasts, hoping that we don't have to go in for a special session, but they have, done that quite a bit in the past. And last year they did that around the budget as well. So that's always a possibility. And then Initiative 175, if negotiations fail, that could be on the ballot. Front Range Passenger Rail may also be on the ballot. So we will see about that. I believe that initiatives signatures are due in August and then finalized in September. So we should have a better outlook on what's going to be on the ballot at that point of time. So I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has, or I can let you all go home.
Thank you, Heather. Appreciate it. I just wanted to ask, you didn't mention House Bill 1318 about traffic safety near schools. Did you, did we take a position on that one?
Yeah, we worked with our partners on that one. So CML, Northwest MCC took positions on that. So the city didn't take an active position, but we did help in negotiations on that one. So, but that was one we were tracking. I should have probably added it to the screen thing or to this presentation.
I'm just interested in the local implications of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Trini, go ahead. You can stop sharing, Heather.
Am I still sharing?
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
Go ahead, Trini.
Hi, Heather. Just really fast.
Yeah.
It's been something that bothers me each legislative session. We obviously have new laws, and I think the communication with the community is so minimal that it sets the stage for a lot of confusion and between modes of transportation. So there's already all of this animosity unfortunately, between cyclists and drivers, right? And when you have something that is as drastic as this Idaho stop law, which came into effect a few years ago, and people are just not informed, then it just adds, fire to the problem. And so I would like to suggest that in the future, and maybe starting with this session, pertinent laws or new laws are showcased on social media, on the city's somehow strategic resources. So people are aware of what's happening. Maybe create like a little booklet or something that can be handed out even at car rental places. I mean, so people understand what people are allowed to do in this state and therefore be more, understanding and more empathetic towards other people and look out for each other and not try to hurt each other. So I
appreciate that. Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, and along with that, like the White Line has done a great job,
Yeah, but it shouldn't be the White Line. It
shouldn't. Exactly. What I mean is your suggestion is great that the city should also say, hey, this is now law in Colorado. Here's how it shows up. And you could work with the police department to do segments on that and just say, we're looking, this is now law. Well, and even the law that passed last year or the year before about, you can't hold a cell phone in your hand while you're driving. I mean, we should have ongoing communication about these laws. Yeah. Michael?
I had a question about a bill that I think mercifully died a swift death, but may have had a good motivation behind it. Maybe it didn't, but anyway, it's House Bill 1125, which would have created a rebuttable presumption that parents are liable for the harm that they produce when they're cruising around. In this case, the way they wrote the bill on e-bikes, e-motos, and scooters. I'd love to see a variant of that bill that just focuses on e-motos. I'm wondering if that, if you know anything about why it died, and if it might come back in a better form.
Yeah, we were hearing very early on in the session that there would be legislation specifically around e-bikes and I don't know exactly what it was going to focus on, but I know there was a large educational component linked with what they were looking at, but it just never materialized. I think the legislator who was going to bring it shortly after saying he was going to bring that got elected to the Joint Budget Committee, and that's, pretty full-time job. So I think things just didn't materialize. In terms of 1125, I was following that a bit. It was sponsored solely by Republicans, so it didn't really have a path forward. And I think that the mechanism, as you mentioned, people just didn't gravitate towards. They felt like it was overly punitive. And so I think that that's ultimately what killed it. But I expected there to be more e-bike legislation this year. It's something that people are talking about constantly, but it didn't materialize. So I would expect it to come back next session in some kind of form.
Cool.
Yeah, it's hard to work out. I mean, we consistently support parents, in so many different ways, right? So
Yeah. It's
And
a hard topic.
yeah,
If I could just add something there, I think that it's such a huge concern at a national level, especially the e-moto part of the conversation, that I think something will be done at a federal level very soon.
Yeah. Now that you say that, Trini, I do remember seeing a bill that's sponsored currently only by Democrats. So I don't know the path forward on that, but it is addressing e-bikes and e-motos safety.
Yeah.
great. Any other comments for Heather? Questions? No? Thank you, Heather. We appreciate your
Thanks, all.
presentation.
Yeah.
Thanks for all the work
Glad
that
to
you've
be
done
here.
on this.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Right.
Okay, great. Matters from the board. We're moving on now to matters from the board. We do need to schedule our 2026 TAB bike tour. We've had a challenge doing that because none of us are available during the original time frame, but Meredith has let me know that that does need to happen before our October meeting. So Meredith, I don't know if you have a range of dates or if we need to do that during this meeting or if we are just kind of being informed about the range of dates that we'll hear about.
Garrett might speak up. He's the leader. He's the leader of the band on this.
Okay. All right, Garrett, let
But-
us know when you'd like to do this bike tour. We're not available the first week of August.
So typically, we've tried to do the bike tour between the second and the third CIP presentation to TAB, but there's no rule that says that's the case. So if we can't do a bike tour until after August, a September timeframe would work. And I think I stated to Meredith last week that we could even do it in the early part of October. We just need to be mindful that in October the weather starts to cool. And we try to do it when the weather is more pleasant. So, if it doesn't work out that we can't schedule it at all this year, well, we'll just try again next year. But we try to do one every year. So hopefully we can find a date that works for folks in September or early October.
Well,
I'm sure we.
yeah, my understanding was it was just the first week in August we weren't available, and otherwise we could do.
Otherwise, I think we can probably find a time. Yeah. Does anyone else have any non-available dates in, say, September? I think September would be a nice time to do it, honestly. I mean, once school is back in session, I'm around. So, Michael, everyone's shaking their heads. Mike, you're the one who travels a lot. Do you have any big trips scheduled in September?
I don't.
Hernan is not available for whichever dates I said to him. But
Yeah. It's just the first week of August is bad.
Yeah. Well, let's look at sometime in September. Garrett, if you want to send us, or if Meredith wants to send us some potential dates, I think we can probably find a time pretty easily.
okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Sounds great. Thanks, Garrett. Appreciate it. Okay, open board comment. Does anyone have anything to say? I will just say that we are in Walk and Bike Month now. And there are so many amazing things coming up, as we mentioned last month. walkandbikemonth.org is the source for all the information about what's happening this month. I strongly encourage anyone listening to participate in Bike to Work Day on Wednesday, June 24th. And there's a lot of stuff happening before and after that. So go to walkandbikemonth.org to learn more.
Oh, and I
Anyone
got an
else?
email from Community Cycles, and they have a ton of stuff going on. So
Yeah.
check out their website as well.
Exactly. Well, and they link to that. They're the group that maintains walkandbikemonth.org.
Well, there you go.
There you go. Anyone
Yeah,
else?
no, I think in the past, well, I just did want to like not let go of adding to the agenda the Emoto conversation. I think that's super important. And obviously right now I think we're kind of very, very late into the night and I don't know how fresh people are, but maybe if we could add it for next month's agenda, unless anybody
Well,
wants.
and what specifically? Because I mean, we have had conversations. We don't have, are we asking for someone from the police department to join us to give a report on what they're doing? Are we wanting to hear from someone? I mean, what are you asking for
Well,
specifically?
just see how on earth we can kind of mitigate this issue. I mean, how we can create partnerships or how we can really address it because it's not going away. And I think if anything, more kids are getting, so I don't know. I mean, I really don't know how to approach it. I don't know if, we can invite the police officer or Amy or multiple people that can pitch in on, what the potential route to address the problem and not just let it grow.
I think Blythe
Mike
probably
and
has some
Blythe,
ideas
yeah.
about that, but Mike raised his hand. Mike, what did you want to add?
Different subjects. So Blythe.
Okay, different subject. Blythe, yeah.
I was going to add that it was either at the May meeting or the April meeting when Tab asked about this item, and I followed up with the city attorney's office. And I'm sorry, but I'll have to refresh my memory. They are doing, as you may know, some research as directed by the city council. And I would strongly advise that we await for that research to complete before we schedule it to Tab. And then also Teresa, our city attorney, said that she would be willing to advise me on what Tab's role would or wouldn't be as it relates to that. So if it's okay, Trini, I'll happily follow up maybe by email to sort of give you an update on where that is. There was a date that she gave me, I just don't remember right now, that they had promised to council that they would have their research finished by a certain date. And then I was adding some time to that and thinking to myself, that might be when, depending on what she says, as it relates to the oversight of Tab on those issues, when we could offer to come back to the board.
That's great. Thank you, Blythe. I appreciate you looking into that. I think that that's exactly the right path, but we need to know what is even possible and what the city's role is and what's possible in terms of dealing with Emoto. So thank you for looking into that, and we look forward to hearing more about that. Okay, Mike.
Yeah, I wanted to make the board aware of something that's come to city council from staff. This proposed downtown development authority, which has a lot of implications for transportation as well as much larger implications generally for the city. And I'm not sure any of us fully understand all the implications, but part of it is the city owns parking garages downtown and on University Hill, that parking lots and they have these existing governmental authorities, the KJID and UJID, that operate the parking garages, and those originally were set up to fund eco passes for downtown employees. And there's this proposal for this new downtown development authority that would be, I believe, given the land that the city owns, where the parking garages are. I'm not sure if there's any guarantee that there'll be continuity in eco passes. And then in addition to I know these garages were formerly under the Community Vitality Department in the city government, which doesn't exist anymore, so it wasn't really under transportation, but it has transportation implications, and it would last for 30 years. And my understanding is that right now downtown is suffering economically, and this agreement sets a baseline year for the city to collect revenues, and any revenues so if downtown suddenly revives and doubles or triples revenues, all that additional money does not go to the city. It goes to this Downtown Development Authority. So I just wanted people to be aware of this, and I would really appreciate it if TAB could get something from the city to help us understand what this is.
We could certainly ask. So, Mike, I'd be happy to talk with you about what you've brought up. I'm informed about that, and there is a stakeholder meeting coming up.
Yeah,
Sorry?
would you share with us? I'm interested too. I had no idea.
Okay. Yeah. So what I understand is the Downtown Development Authority will supersede the existing general improvement districts, and all of this is under development, right? It has to go to the vote. It's in development, right? Nothing is set in stone yet. And things are being presented to council, and council is providing feedback. So there's current conversation about the implications of all these changes, but my understanding is, so Boulder Chamber Transportation Connections now manages the EcoPass program for KJID, UJID, and Boulder Junction. And we have advocated for the ongoing funding of EcoPasses through whatever new mechanism exists in the DDA. So I'm not sure how much I can say about all of that in this forum, and I don't know. I don't have a lot more information than that right now, because it is, like I said, it's in discussion. It's going to council. It's something that will have to be put to a vote. But you are all welcome to participate in the stakeholder conversations that are coming up. So there is a stakeholder meeting that Samantha Bromberg, who is a city employee, has organized for July 15th. And I'm assuming, Blythe, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that members of the board could certainly participate in that conversation. And it's a virtual meeting as far as I understand. So it's in discussion, but the way that a Downtown Development Authority works is that it is a tax increment financing mechanism, and they could elect to add the right word is escaping me, but they could add another kind of mechanism, but it's really tax increment finance.
Mill levy is the other.
They could add a mill levy or something, but that's not certain, but the certainty is the tax increment financing. So like you said, if the the property values of the properties within the DDA, soar, they will go up through a kind of fairly predictable, hopefully a predictable sort of raise in value. And that value, that increment, is then used for improving infrastructure and signage and other sort of things within the district. And it's only properties included in the Downtown Development Authority that then vote on those changes in the uses of those funds. So it doesn't divert sales tax. It only uses the increment of the property tax value that accrues over time to improve the resources within that district. Blythe, do I have that? I think I have that correct. I've been part of these conversations for a while, so I've been listening. If anybody else on the call wants to correct anything I said, please do.
That sounded mostly right, but I'm not an expert on it, and I was just going to offer to reach out to those that are working on it and see what might be the mechanism for boards and commissions to be involved, or just general public to be involved.
Exactly, and I'm not sure who that stakeholder conversation on the July 15th is open to, but I think that, I mean, that's something that we can ask Samantha Bromberg about. And so Mike, it sounds like you read the council study session packet on the DDA. So that's where you're getting this information.
Yeah.
So that information is out there, and people can read that packet. As far as I understand, it'll go back to council in August. But for my part, I am advocating for the continued funding of EcoPasses through the parking revenues as it is currently funded.
Thank you. Yeah, Blake, that I would appreciate if maybe Tab could get presentation from staff about this at some point, maybe before August. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll look into that, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, if we could get a presentation from, well, I was going to say, so Samantha Bromberg is the one who's organizing the conversation about the mobility hubs that are part of the kind of parking garage network. So I could be conflating things as well, but we'll look into it and share more information.
Yeah, the Sam has peripheral involvement. She's not probably the person to speak to the DDA
about the DDA.
The new office of Culture and Economic, OCED, Office of, can't remember if the C is Community or Culture and Economic Development, under the city manager's office, is in the lead. And I will ask them what are the opportunities that they foresee for the public and or boards and commissions, and I'll get back to the tab.
Right. Yeah, I'm sorry. I think the July 15th opportunity is about the mobility hubs, not about the DDA. Sorry about that. Okay. But yes, I think you're right, Mike, that it does have implications for transportation, and we've been very mindful of those implications. But so far, things are very much it's quite nascent. It has to go to a vote. And even the boundaries of the DDA haven't been fully determined. So.
Okay, it just seems to be moving fast. So.
Yeah, and Darcy, who would appoint the DDA, or how would these members, or who would they be?
Well, property owners within the designated DDA boundaries.
The property owners that became newly property owners because the city gave those parking garages to them, for example?
No, that's different. I'm not the person we should bring in someone from the Economic Vitality Department to talk about it.
About this whole thing.
I think it's the mayor and council.
Okay.
Board, but they do have to be majority property owners or residents. Yeah, certain qualifications
within the defined boundaries, and that's what hasn't been fully defined yet. So,
and one city council member will be on the board.
Yeah, it's a new taxing authority. It's a new way to generate revenue to support the public realm and the properties in that defined area. Okay. Sorry for talking out of turn. We should bring in the right people to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. So, future agenda topics. Blythe, do you want to talk about that?
Let's see. I had this tab opened, and then I was. Excuse me, sorry for delay. Okay. Future agenda topics. I'm seeing next July capital improvement plan overview from Garrett, staff presentation, and tab feedback for the civic area plan from Shahomie Kuriagawa in Parks and Rec. And then more on the CIP, as we mentioned earlier, in the following month. We may be putting in a development that on July, but that is to be determined, and certainly we'll review with Darcy and Mike at our agenda meeting. But other than that, that gets us the next few months.
Great. Okay, any other matters from the board at this time? No? Enjoy Walk and Bike Month. And do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? We didn't go too far. We went 5 minutes over. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Anyone?
Michael's lips moved. I think.
Did you not hear me?
No.
No, I did not hear you.
Weird. Okay. Yeah, I moved to adjourn.
Okay.
I second.
Okay, excellent. Moved and seconded. All in favor of adjourning the meeting, raise your hand and say aye.
Hi.
Hey.
Aye. Any opposed? Nope. All right. We are adjourning the meeting at 9:09 p.m. 4-0. All right. Thank you all very much. Appreciate your participation tonight. And we'll see you next month.